Chapter 34. An Unexpected Setback. The tranquility of their victory was shattered as an unnatural cold seeped into the water around them, a stark contrast to the warmth of their triumph. Adrian's breath caught as he watched the vivid corals surrounding the heart of the reef lose their brilliance, their radiant hues draining into muted grays. Serena's pulse quickened, the residual joy from their success giving way to dread as an eerie darkness seemed to crawl from the depths. The energy that enveloped them was heavy and suffocating, pressing down on their spirits like an unseen weight. It was as if the reef itself was recoiling, rejecting the harmony they had just restored. "This isn't right," Serena whispered, her voice tight with concern. The Heartstone, which had pulsed with a radiant, life-affirming energy moments ago, now flickered faintly in her grasp, its glow dimming with every passing second. Adrian tightened his grip on his sword, scanning their surroundings for a source of the disturbance. But there was no physical enemy to confront, only the ominous sensation of something ancient and malevolent stirring beneath the surface. The realization dawned on both of them almost simultaneously. The ritual had not fully banished the curse. Instead, it had awakened something far more sinister, a deeper darkness that had lain dormant, hidden even from the prophecy. As the oppressive energy continued to spread, the water around them grew colder, and an unnatural silence settled over the reef. The vibrant life that had returned after the ritual now seemed to retreat into the shadows, leaving Adrian and Serena standing alone in the eerie void. "We may have broken the curse," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the tension in his posture. "But this feels like the curse's source. And it's not going to let us leave so easily." Serena nodded, her grip on the Heartstone tightening as determination flickered in her eyes. Their journey was far from over. What they had faced so far had only been the beginning of a battle against an even greater force. Serena's fingers tightened around the Heartstone as a chill spread through her body, its feeble flicker casting faint shadows on her face. Just moments ago, the stone had been a beacon of triumph, its brilliance a testament to their hard-fought victory. Now, its dimming light felt like an omen, each sputter a warning of something lurking beyond their understanding. Her chest tightened, the air around her seeming heavier, oppressive, as if the reef itself was holding its breath. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rhythmic pounding of her heart. "Something's wrong." Adrian's jaw tightened as he scanned their surroundings, his instincts honed by years of navigating treacherous seas urging him to prepare for the worst. The vibrant corals, which had bloomed with life just moments before, now seemed muted and lifeless, their energy leaching into the encroaching darkness. He gripped the hilt of his sword, muscles coiled, ready to spring into action. "I feel it too," he admitted, his gaze darting between the fading light of the Heartstone and the growing shadows around them. There was no immediate threat he could see, but the sensation in the water was unmistakable, a cold, invasive presence that set every nerve on edge. "We didn't finish it," Serena murmured, her voice trembling with realization. "The curse, or something deeper, it's still here." Adrian moved closer to her, their bond a tangible source of strength as they braced for whatever was coming. The once triumphant energy of the ritual had shifted into something darker, a foreboding that seeped into their bones. They were no longer standing in the heart of a restored reef, but in the threshold of a new battle, one they hadn't anticipated but would have to face together. A low, resonant rumble rolled through the reef, reverberating in their chests and rattling the delicate coral structures around them. Serena staggered, barely keeping her footing as the seafloor quaked beneath them, sending plumes of sand swirling into the water. It felt as if the ocean itself had come alive, its once protective embrace now hostile and unyielding. The pressure in the water intensified, pressing against their bodies and filling their ears with a haunting, droning hum. "What's happening?" Serena gasped, clutching Adrian's arm as the vibrations grew stronger. Above them, the light from the sun dimmed as a shadow slid across the surface, stretching and twisting like an ominous shroud. The reef, once vibrant and full of life, seemed to shrink beneath the encroaching darkness. The water turned colder, the chill biting at their skin despite their adrenaline-fueled movements. Around them, the coral's colors continued to drain away, fading into ghostly shades of gray, as if the very soul of the reef was being siphoned away. Adrian tightened his grip on his sword, his knuckles widening as he scanned the gloom for any sign of what was causing this shift. "Something's coming," Adrian muttered, his voice low and steady despite the tension coiling within him. Serena nodded, her gaze darting through the murk, trying to pierce the oppressive shadows. The air, or rather the water, was thick with anticipation, a primal warning that they were no longer alone. The reef felt smaller, as if the vast ocean had closed in around them, and every instinct screamed that whatever was approaching would test them in ways they had not yet imagined. Adrian's voice cut through the oppressive silence, sharp and tense. "What's happening?" he asked, his eyes darting around the shadowed waters. The ocean that had once been vibrant and alive now seemed suffocatingly still, as though holding its breath in anticipation of something terrible. His grip on his sword tightened, the familiar weight of the weapon providing little comfort against the encroaching dread. Serena stood beside him, her hands trembling as she clutched the dimming hearthstone, its flickering light casting ghostly reflections on the surrounding coral. "I don't know," Serena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the energy in the water shifting, a heavy, malevolent presence pressing down on her. The once lively reef now seemed hollow and lifeless, the fading coral like skeletal remains of a world that had already begun to die. Her instincts screamed at her to move, to run, but there was nowhere to go. "It's as if the curse, it wasn't fully broken," she said, her voice faltering as she tried to make sense of what she felt. "Something is fighting back." As if in response to her words, a low rumble rolled through the reef, shaking the seafloor and dislodging fragments of stone and coral. The vibrations rippled through the water, a warning of something vast and terrible stirring in the depths. Adrian and Serena exchanged a glance, their fear mirrored in each other's eyes, but beneath it was a shared determination. Whatever was coming, they had faced impossible odds before, and together, they would face this new threat, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. Serena's heart raced in her chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the eerie stillness around them. The curse had been broken, she was certain of it. She had seen the dark creature dissolve into nothingness, its malevolence dissipating into the ether. She had felt the ritual's magic surge through her, powerful and undeniable, like the closing of a book on an ancient tragedy. But now, that triumph seemed fragile, as though their hard-won victory was unraveling before her eyes. It felt wrong, as if something unseen was clawing its way back into the world they had fought so desperately to save. Her eyes fell to the hearthstone in her hand, its once brilliant glow reduced to a weak, unsteady flicker. The vibrant hues of the reef had dulled, the life it once radiated fading as shadows encroached from every direction. A gnawing doubt began to take hold of her mind. Was the ritual incomplete? Had they overlooked something crucial? Or was this the curse's way of striking back, more vengeful and insidious than before? The weight of her uncertainty pressed heavily on her, but she couldn't afford to falter, not now. Adrian's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "Serena, we need to move. Something's coming." She looked up to see his unwavering gaze, the resolve in his expression anchoring her. She gripped the hearthstone tighter, drawing on what little light it still offered. Whatever was happening, they would face it together. She swallowed hard, forcing her fear aside. "You're right," she said, her voice steadier now. "If the curse is fighting back, then we'll find a way to stop it, for good this time." Serena's voice trembled as she spoke, the confusion and fear in her tone mirroring the turmoil within her. "We did everything right," she murmured, clutching the dimming hearthstone as though its failing light could provide answers. "The ritual was supposed to break the curse, to restore the reef. But this feels like something else entirely." Her gaze darted across the darkening waters, her mind racing to make sense of the oppressive energy enveloping them. It wasn't just the curse returning, it felt deeper, more ancient, as if they had unknowingly awakened a force far beyond their comprehension. Adrian placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his grip firm despite the tension in his jaw. "Then we'll face it," he said, his voice low but resolute. "We didn't come this far to let the reef fall into darkness again. If this is something new, we'll figure it out, together. He scanned the surrounding waters, his instincts warning him to stay vigilant. The unease thickened around them like a living entity, its presence growing stronger with every passing moment. Whatever they had unleashed, it wasn't bound by the rules of the curse they had fought so hard to destroy. Serena nodded, drawing strength from Adrian's unwavering determination. She straightened, her grip on the heartstone tightening as she willed its fading light to persist. "You're right," she said, her voice steadier now. "If this is something else, then we need to understand it, and stop it before it spreads." The fear in her chest remained, but it was tempered by a spark of resolve. Whatever they were up against, they couldn't afford to hesitate. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter how dark or dangerous it proved to be. The once calm water erupted into a chaotic swirl, currents tugging at Adrian and Serena as if trying to drag them into the abyss. Waves of force rippled through the reef, dislodging fragments of coral and stirring up clouds of silt. In the midst of this upheaval, an eerie green light began to rise from the depths. It shimmered with a sickly hue, starkly different from the vibrant, life-giving radiance of the Heartstone or the soothing glow of the enchanted elements they had gathered. This light carried a sense of malice, an unnatural energy that made the very water around them feel tainted and cold. Serena clutched the Heartstone, its faint pulse barely visible in the face of the malevolent glow. Her breath caught as the light grew brighter, spreading like a toxic stain through the surrounding water. The weight of it pressed against her chest, an unshakable sense of dread creeping into her thoughts. Adrian drew his sword, the blade catching the eerie green reflection as he stepped closer to her, his eyes narrowing in determination. Whatever was rising from the depths, it was unlike anything they had encountered before. As the light approached, its source became terrifyingly clear. A massive figure began to materialize in the murky depths, its outline twisting with shadows and unnatural energy. It wasn't like the creature they had faced before. It was something darker, a force born of corrupted magic and ancient anger. The water around them seemed to hum with its power, the sound both a warning and a promise of the chaos to come. Adrian and Serena stood together, their bond the only anchor against the oncoming storm, bracing themselves for a confrontation they could barely begin to comprehend. From the depths of the swirling green light, a figure began to take shape. Dressed in tattered robes that rippled like liquid shadow, their form was ghostly and ever-shifting, as though they were part of the water itself. The edges of their silhouette bled into the surrounding currents, making it impossible to tell where they ended and the ocean began. Their movements were slow, deliberate, and unnervingly smooth, like a predator stalking its prey. Each step seemed to carry the weight of untold centuries, and with every ripple of their robes, the water grew colder, heavier. The figure's eyes glowed with a piercing green light, twin orbs of malice that burned through the murky water. The intensity of their gaze made Serena take an involuntary step back, her instincts screaming danger. Adrian tightened his grip on his sword, his jaw clenched as he stood his ground against the oppressive energy radiating from the figure. Around them, the currents became erratic, whipping in all directions as if caught in the grip of a violent storm. The reef trembled, the once bright corals now dull and lifeless in the presence of this malevolent force. An aura of palpable hatred emanated from the figure, distorting the water around them and creating an unnatural silence broken only by the low hum of their power. Serena's heart raced as she realized this was no remnant of the curse. They were facing the curse's true origin, a being whose presence corrupted everything it touched. The air felt heavy with their intent, and in the depths of her mind, Serena could feel whispers, fragmented thoughts of despair and futility. But she forced herself to focus, locking eyes with Adrian. Together, they would face this shadow of ancient wrath, no matter what it took. Serena's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing as the figure's identity became clear. This wasn't just a shadow or a remnant of dark magic. It was the spirit of the ancient sorcerer who had cursed the reef centuries ago. The stories she had read described his power as vast and unrelenting, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer weight of his presence. The water around him seemed to pulse with his essence, every movement radiating the oppressive force of the curse he had created. She could feel the raw malice emanating from him, a malevolence so profound it seemed to seep into the very core of her being. The sorcerer's aura was overwhelming, a suffocating presence that twisted the currents into frenzied chaos. His glowing green eyes fixed on Serena and Adrian, burning with a hatred that had festered for centuries. It wasn't just anger, it was an ancient, unyielding wrath directed at those who dared to challenge him. The water between them seemed to grow heavier, pressing against their bodies as if trying to force them to their knees. Serena clutched the heartstone tightly, its flickering light a fragile beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. Beside her, Adrian raised his sword, his stance unwavering despite the palpable fear that hung in the air. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the sorcerer's gaze bore into them, as though he was measuring their resolve, testing their worth. Serena's pulse quickened, but she refused to look away, finding strength in the steady presence of Adrian at her side. She realized that their victory over the curse had been incomplete. The ritual had drawn the sorcerer back from whatever abyss he had been trapped in. Now, they faced the ultimate challenge, not just breaking the curse, but defeating the very source of its power. Together, they would have to stand against an ancient force far greater than anything they had encountered before. "You dare to break my curse?" The sorcerer's voice boomed, a sound that reverberated through the water like a thunderclap, shaking the very bones of the reef. It wasn't just a voice, it was a force, a tidal wave of rage and power that pressed against Serena and Adrian, making it hard to breathe, to think. The reef, which had begun to show signs of life after the ritual, now trembled as though it, too, feared the sorcerer's wrath. Coral structures groaned under the weight of the vibrations, and schools of fish scattered into the darkness, fleeing the oppressive energy that emanated from the spirit. "Did you think it would be so easy to undo what I have wrought?" The sorcerer continued, his words laced with a venomous mockery that chilled Serena to the core. His glowing green eyes burned with malice as he surveyed them, his spectral form twisting and reforming as though he was part of the water itself. He moved closer, and the currents around him grew stronger, swirling with a chaotic energy that threatened to pull Serena and Adrian off balance. The sorcerer's presence was a reminder of the depth of his power, the centuries of pain and destruction his curse had caused, and the sheer audacity it had taken for them to challenge him. Serena felt her grip tighten on the heartstone, its flickering light barely holding against the sorcerer's overwhelming energy. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the disdain he held for their defiance. Adrian stood firm beside her, his sword gleaming faintly in the dim light, but even he seemed momentarily shaken by the force of the sorcerer's words. Serena's heart raced, but she forced herself to meet the sorcerer's eyes. "It's not about ease," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "It's about what's right. Your time is over, and we won't let you keep this reef in darkness any longer." Adrian stepped forward, his posture resolute, though he knew the blade in his hand was little more than a symbol of defiance against a force as ancient and potent as the sorcerer. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't a battle of steel and strength, it was a battle of wills. "We've broken your curse, and the reef will be free," he declared, his voice cutting through the oppressive aura the sorcerer radiated. His words echoed, firm and unwavering, as if to challenge the very forces of darkness that had held the reef in its grip for centuries. The sword gleamed faintly in his hand, but it wasn't the weapon that gave him courage, it was the resolve burning in his chest, the knowledge that they had come too far, sacrificed too much to back down now. The sorcerer's eyes glowed brighter in response, the green light flaring like an inferno. The water around them swirled violently, a chaotic storm of swirling currents and dark energy that pushed against them. Yet Adrian stood tall, refusing to retreat an inch. He could feel the weight of the sorcerer's malice pressing on him, but he gritted his teeth and held his ground. The reef, once vibrant and full of life, had fallen silent in the presence of this malevolent force. The coral seemed to shudder, and the shadows deepened, but Adrian's resolve only strengthened. He wasn't just fighting for the reef, he was fighting for Serena, for their future, and for everything that the curse had stolen from this sacred place. "You're too late," Adrian finished, his voice still defiant, though the sorcerer's presence made every word feel like a challenge to the very forces of nature. Behind him, Serena stood with the Heartstone, her grip tightening as she summoned the last reserves of their power. The sorcerer's laughter echoed in the water, mocking and cruel, but Adrian refused to let it shake him. He knew that, no matter how powerful the sorcerer seemed, he and Serena had something far greater: the strength of their bond, the hope of the reef, and the combined will to see this through to the end. The sorcerer's laugh echoed through the water, cold and mocking, reverberating with an ancient bitterness that sent a ripple of fear through Serena and Adrian. It was a laugh that seemed to seep into their very souls, chilling them to the core. "Fools!" he hissed, his voice like the scraping of bones against stone. "The curse was only a part of my power. You may have weakened it, but the darkness that created it remains, and it is eternal." His words were venomous, each syllable dripping with malice, as if the very essence of the reef had been tainted by his presence long ago. The oppressive aura around him grew stronger, suffocating the water in a dense, suffocating fog. The vibrant beauty of the coral faded further, replaced by the darkness that clung to the sorcerer's every word. Serena's heart raced as the realization set in. They had underestimated the depths of the sorcerer's malevolence. The curse they had broken was only a fraction of the power he wielded. His claim that the darkness was eternal filled her with dread, but also a surge of defiance. She glanced at Adrian, the determination in his eyes matching her own. They had come this far, and they would not let fear guide their actions now. They had faced trials beyond measure, and they would face this one together. Still, as the sorcerer's form twisted and writhed in the water, his very presence distorting the currents, Serena couldn't help but feel the weight of his threat. How could they fight something that seemed as infinite as the sea itself? "You may have drawn me back with your little ritual," the sorcerer continued, his voice a low growl. "But now you shall pay the price for your insolence." His words stung, each one a promise of unimaginable torment. The water around them swirled violently, the sea itself seemingly enraged by his presence. The Heartstone in Serena's hand flickered, its glow dimming under the weight of the sorcerer's power. For a moment, the very heart of the reef seemed to tremble, the last remnants of light and life being swallowed by the encroaching darkness. But Serena and Adrian stood firm, their bond unbroken, their resolve steeled by the love they had fought for and the future they refused to let slip away. The sorcerer may have been ancient and powerful, but together, they were more than the sum of their fears. As the sorcerer's words hung heavy in the water, the eerie green light around him intensified, pulsing like the beat of a malevolent heart. It spread swiftly, radiating through the reef like a plague, infecting everything it touched. The water, once clear and full of life, grew thick with a sickly hue, the purity of the ocean's depths corrupted by the sorcerer's power. The vibrant corals, which had once shimmered in brilliant colors, began to wither, their hues fading to a dull, lifeless gray. The graceful movements of the fish and sea creatures, once a symphony of vibrant motion, turned frantic and disorganized, as if they sensed the impending doom that loomed over their home. The very currents seemed to twist, no longer flowing with the rhythm of the reef, but spiraling into chaos as the sorcerer's dark energy spread outward like an infectious disease. The reef's life force, once radiant and thriving, was slowly suffocating under the oppressive weight of the sorcerer's magic. The delicate, living ecosystem seemed to recoil from the encroaching darkness, the currents themselves growing heavy and sluggish. Schools of fish darted in all directions, desperate to escape the doom that hung over them. Even the seaweed, which had swayed gently in the underwater currents, now lay lifeless, its tendrils limp and devoid of movement. It was as if the very heart of the reef was being torn apart, consumed by the evil force the sorcerer had summoned. The once thriving sanctuary of life was now a barren, decaying wasteland. And all the while, the sorcerer stood at its center, his green eyes burning with malicious satisfaction, feeding off the devastation he wrought. In Serena's hand, the Heartstone flickered weakly, its once vibrant glow now faint and struggling to hold its ground against the overwhelming power of the darkness. The soft pulse of its light seemed to waver with every passing second, as though it, too, felt the weight of the sorcerer's presence and feared its imminent extinction. The stone had been their hope, the last remaining symbol of the reef's restoration and their triumph. but now, it appeared to be faltering in the face of the sorcerer's ancient magic. Serena's fingers tightened around it, as if willing the heart stone to draw on whatever strength remained within it. But the longer she stood against the growing power of the sorcerer, the more she realized how dire their situation had become. The battle was far from over, and this time, it felt as though the very soul of the reef was at stake. Serena could feel the weight of the sorcerer's dark magic closing in on her, a suffocating presence that seemed to reach into her very soul. The water around her, once filled with the vibrant hum of life, now felt heavy, thick with the poison of the sorcerer's curse. It was as though every pulse of energy in the reef was being drained, swallowed by the darkness that spread from the depths. The heart stone in her hand, once a beacon of hope, flickered weakly as if struggling to survive against the overpowering force that surrounded them. The vibrant corals, the shimmering fish, the very essence of the reef, seemed to wither in unison, as though the life of the ocean itself was being extinguished before her eyes. Each moment that passed was a slow, agonizing unraveling of everything they had fought for. Desperation clawed at her heart as the reality of their situation sank in. Their victory, hard-earned and costly, now seemed like a fleeting illusion. The sorcerer's power was undoing everything they had done, erasing their triumph with each surge of darkness that spread through the waters. Serena's breath came faster, the weight of their failure pressing down on her chest as she struggled to maintain her focus. The reef, once a place of vibrant life and beauty, was slipping away, its fragile existence crumbling beneath the sorcerer's curse. The power they had gathered, the heartstone, the ritual, the sacrifices, was now being overshadowed by the dark force that had first brought the reef to its knees. If they didn't act quickly, everything they had worked for would be lost, and the reef would fall into eternal decay. In that moment, Serena realized that they were standing on the edge of annihilation, their final chance slipping through their fingers like the sands of time. She glanced at Adrian, her heart heavy with the weight of what they stood to lose. But even in the face of overwhelming despair, something inside her ignited, a spark of determination, a refusal to let the reef fall into darkness. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let it all end now. They had broken the curse before, and she wasn't about to let it consume everything they had sacrificed. She gripped the heartstone tightly, drawing on every ounce of strength and hope she had left. It wasn't over yet, not while they still had a chance to fight back. "There has to be a way to stop him," Serena said, her voice trembling as her eyes met Adrian's, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. She felt a cold dread spreading through her chest, but beneath it, a fire of determination sparked. The darkness swirling around them was suffocating, but she refused to let it claim the reef. The heartstone still pulsed weakly in her hand, its glow a flickering beacon in the oppressive shadows that crept through the water. They had fought too hard, endured too much, for it all to be taken away in an instant. She clenched her fists, fighting against the surge of hopelessness threatening to overwhelm her. They couldn't let the sorcerer win, not after everything they had sacrificed. Adrian stood beside her, his face grim but resolute, his sword still in hand as if ready for whatever came next. He could feel the magic pressing in, suffocating the very essence of the reef. The once thriving marine life was retreating into the darkness, and the vibrant corals were beginning to crumble, their colors fading into a dull, lifeless hue. The sorcerer's curse had been more than just an obstacle. It was the embodiment of a nightmare, and it was now unraveling everything they had fought to protect. Adrian's mind raced, searching for any solution, any way to turn the tide in their favor. "We can't let him undo everything," he echoed, his voice low but filled with an unwavering determination. He knew there had to be something they could do, some way to fight back against the curse that threatened to consume everything. Serena's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixed on the figure of the sorcerer who loomed over them, his form still shifting with the force of his dark magic. She could feel the pressure of the water around her, the oppressive energy of the sorcerer's presence tightening with every passing moment. But as she stood there, clutching the heartstone in her hand, a realization began to settle over her. The heartstone was the key, not just to the curse, but to everything they had worked for. She wasn't just holding on to a relic of power, she was holding on to hope. If they could channel its energy correctly, if they could focus its light in the right way, they might just stand a chance against the sorcerer's dark magic. The question was, how? She turned to Adrian, her eyes filled with urgency. We need to find a way to use the Heartstone, to focus its power, to push back against his darkness. It was their last hope, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Adrian's mind raced, scrambling to make sense of the rapidly unfolding chaos around them. The ritual had been their best hope, a carefully crafted plan to undo the curse that had haunted the reef for centuries. But facing the sorcerer himself, his dark magic far more potent than they had anticipated, was an entirely different battle. Adrian's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of weakness in the sorcerer's power, but the water was thick with the sorcerer's malevolent influence. The Heartstone, now flickering weakly in Serena's hand, was their last remaining hope. They had to figure out how to make it work, or everything they had fought for would be lost. Adrian clenched his jaw, frustration rising as he realized that this battle was far from over. It wasn't just about defeating the sorcerer, it was about finding the strength to hold on to everything they had just fought to restore. His gaze locked with Serena's, his heart pounding in his chest as he spoke the words he knew had to be true. "The Heartstone," he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the water. The stone was their only remaining connection to the light that had once powered the reef's natural beauty. But right now, it felt fragile, barely clinging to life under the weight of the sorcerer's curse. Adrian's mind whirled with thoughts of how to empower it, how to amplify its energy before the sorcerer could finish undoing their victory. "It's the key," he repeated, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty swirling around them. "We need to find a way to strengthen its power, to push back against his darkness." The solution, however, remained elusive, until now, when it was clear that only by harnessing the Heartstone's full potential could they hope to defeat the sorcerer once and for all. Serena's heart skipped a beat as Adrian's words sank in, a flicker of hope rekindling within her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but Adrian's resolve fueled her own. She had been holding on to the Heartstone, feeling its power wane with every passing second, but now she understood what they needed to do. The stone wasn't just a symbol of the reef's life, it was a conduit, a force waiting to be fully awakened. But to do that, they needed to act quickly. She met Adrian's gaze, determination flooding her veins. "We can do this," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "Together, we can channel the Heartstone's power and push back the darkness. We just need to find the right way." Time was running out, but with Adrian by her side, Serena believed they could still turn the tide in their favor. They had faced down impossible odds before, and they would do it again. Before they could make their move, the sorcerer struck with terrifying speed. A dark energy, thick with malevolent intent, surged toward them in a crushing wave. The water around them seemed to warp and twist, coiling like serpents before it, as if it were alive with the sorcerer's fury. Adrian's heart pounded in his chest, his instincts screaming at him to act. He raised his sword, hoping to deflect the incoming magic, but the sheer power of the attack overwhelmed him. The dark torrent hit him like a freight train, the force of it knocking the breath from his lungs and sending him hurtling through the water. His sword, useless against the onslaught, flew from his hand as his body was flung backward with a bone-rattling impact. The world spun in an agonizing blur as Adrian slammed into the coral, the sharp edges of the reef cutting into his side. Pain exploded through his body, but he barely registered it, his mind reeling from the overwhelming force of the sorcerer's magic. For a moment, he could only taste the bitter salt water in his mouth as he struggled to push himself upright. The darkness still swirled around him, the sorcerer's power crackling through the water, leaving behind an oppressive void in its wake. The reef, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed tainted, suffocated by the sorcerer's magic. Adrian's head throbbed with pain, but his gaze never left Serena, the last hope of their victory. Serena's heart lurched as she saw Adrian being sent careening into the reef, his body crashing against the coral with sickening force. Her blood ran cold as she watched him struggle to rise, knowing that they couldn't afford to lose him now. The sorcerer's laughter echoed through the water, a chilling sound that sent shivers down her spine. But she didn't hesitate. With every ounce of strength she could muster, Serena clenched her grip on the Heartstone, willing its fading light to shine once more. She couldn't allow the sorcerer to win, not after everything they had fought for. As Adrian recovered, she readied herself, determined to fight back with everything she had, her resolve stronger than ever before. "Adrian!" Serena's voice cracked through the water, sharp with panic as she darted toward him. Her heart hammered in her chest as she saw him struggling to rise, his movements sluggish from the force of the attack. The once vibrant coral beneath him seemed to darken, turning to shades of gray as the sorcerer's dark magic continued to press in on them. Serena's instinct screamed for her to reach him, to pull him from the crushing weight of the sorcerer's malevolent force. But the water around them was thick with the oppressive energy that the sorcerer wielded. Every stroke she took felt as though she were swimming through treacle, the dark current pulling at her, tugging her back toward the heart of the reef. The air was electric, the water charged with an unnatural cold as the sorcerer's magic intensified. A suffocating presence surrounded them, squeezing the very life out of the reef. Serena felt it pressing against her chest, like invisible hands clawing at her heart, threatening to tear her apart. The Heartstone in her hand flickered weakly, its once brilliant glow barely a whisper of light against the sorcerer's darkness. She could feel the power of the curse pushing back, trying to reclaim what they had so painfully fought to break. The reef, the very thing they had worked so hard to save, seemed to be slipping from their grasp as the waters around them churned with growing malice. "Adrian!" she called again, her voice hoarse as she reached him, pulling him up with whatever strength she had left. His body felt heavy against her, as if the sorcerer's magic had already begun to drain him of his vitality. Serena could see the determination in his eyes, though, the same fire that had driven them both this far. They had been through too much, faced too many dangers, to let the sorcerer win now. With her heart pounding in her ears, Serena forced herself to focus. "We can't give up," she whispered fiercely, clinging to the faintest spark of hope. "We'll finish this together." Serena's grip on the Heartstone tightened as panic surged within her. She could feel the stone's diminishing strength, its once brilliant glow now a faint pulse of light in her hand. The sorcerer's presence loomed over them, an insurmountable shadow pressing down on the reef, suffocating its very life force. The coral around them continued to wither, turning black under the weight of the dark magic. Every breath Serena took felt like she was suffocating, the water around her thick with the sorcerer's malignant energy. She had to act, had to find a way to turn the tide before they were consumed by the very darkness they had fought so hard to break. The Heartstone's flickering light was barely noticeable now, struggling against the onslaught of the sorcerer's power. Serena's mind raced as she searched for a solution. She had no time to think of strategies or spells. They were locked in a fight against time itself. The realization hit her like a crushing wave. The stone could not be used on its own. It needed something more, something that neither she nor Adrian had anticipated. The ritual had been meant to break the curse, not to confront the sorcerer directly. In her desperation, Serena remembered the bond they shared, the strength they had drawn from one another throughout their journey. The power of the Heartstone was not solely its own. It was a reflection of their unity, of the strength of their combined wills. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling as the weight of the moment bore down on her. "It's us. The Heartstone needs both of us to unleash its true power." Her heart raced as she reached out to him, her gaze meeting his. They had always been stronger together, drawing on each other's strength when the odds seemed insurmountable. This was no different. Serena could feel it in her bones. If they could harness the bond between them, if they could combine their wills with the Heartstone's fading light, they might stand a chance. "We need to channel everything we have, Adrian. This is our only chance." As the sorcerer's dark magic pressed in around them, Serena's mind grasped at the remnants of hope. In the midst of their peril, her thoughts returned to the prophecy, those ancient words that had once seemed distant, now taking on a new, urgent meaning. She remembered how they had read the prophecy together, how it had spoken of a union born of the depths of the reef, a bond stronger than any magic or curse. It had always been there, and embedded in the words she had thought were simply guiding them toward the ritual. But now she understood. The union spoken of wasn't just a ritualistic requirement, but the strength of their relationship, their shared journey. Their connection was the key. The prophecy hadn't just referred to the physical bond of the heartstone or the elements they had gathered. It had been speaking of something much deeper. It was their unwavering trust in each other, the way they had supported one another through every challenge, every moment of doubt and fear. It was their shared determination to free the reef, a bond built on their unspoken understanding and loyalty. Serena's heart raced as she realized that their connection had been the true source of their strength all along. The heartstone wasn't just a tool to be wielded, it was a conduit for the love and unity they had forged in the depths of the reef, in the face of overwhelming darkness. With newfound clarity, Serena knew what she had to do. She turned to Adrian, her eyes locking with his, and in that moment, everything fell into place. "It's us, Adrian," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of their shared purpose. "Our bond is the key. The prophecy was never just about the stone. It's about what we've become together. We need to merge our strength, our hearts, to make the heartstone truly powerful." The realization filled her with a sense of peace amid the chaos. Their journey had led them here, and together, they would be the ones to bring the reef its salvation. Serena's voice was urgent, but beneath the desperation, there was a quiet certainty that took root deep within her. She helped Adrian to his feet, her hands steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. His expression was clouded with confusion and pain, but when their eyes met, a spark of understanding ignited. "Adrian, we have to do this together," she repeated, her voice firm, cutting through the overwhelming darkness. "The prophecy, it's our bond that can save the reef. We need to combine our strength, to channel it through the heartstone." The weight of her words hung in the water between them, as though the very currents of the reef had heard them and paused in anticipation. Adrian's chest heaved with the effort to stand, his body battered from the sorcerer's attack, but there was a flicker of determination in his eyes. He knew what Serena was saying. He could feel it now, the truth of it, the deep connection that had grown between them throughout their journey. It was more than just a shared goal or mutual respect. It was the strength of everything they had faced together. From the moment they had set foot on this cursed reef, they had fought side by side, and now, their unity would be the weapon that would defeat the darkness. "Together," he echoed, his voice raw but resolute. "Let's do this." Serena placed the heartstone between them, its light flickering weakly in her hand, but she felt a surge of warmth as she held it. She knew what they had to do. They had always been more than the sum of their parts. Together, they had overcome every challenge the reef had thrown at them, and now they had to do the impossible. Serena reached for Adrian's hand, her fingers curling around his, and in that moment, their bond solidified. The heartstone pulsed, drawing strength from their touch, and as they channeled their will into it, a surge of power began to build. Their shared connection flowed through the stone, and the water around them began to stir with the energy they had unleashed. Adrian nodded, the realization hitting him with the force of a wave. His gaze locked with Serena's, a silent understanding passing between them. They had fought side by side throughout their journey, and now, standing together at the very heart of the reef, they were stronger than they had ever been. Without a word, they moved in unison, positioning themselves beside one another, their hands locking around the heartstone. The weight of the moment pressed down on them, but it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, there was a calm certainty in their connection, a shared purpose that anchored them in the midst of the storm. With their hands wrapped around the heartstone, they focused entirely on the energy that flowed between them. Their thoughts aligned, their breaths steady, and their hearts beat in synchrony as they poured everything they had into the gem. It was more than just a physical act. It was the summation of every challenge they had faced, every moment of doubt and triumph that had brought them to this point. Adrian could feel Serena's strength, her resolve, and it fueled him as much as the power of the heartstone itself. Together, they summoned their will, their love, and their unshakable belief in one another, willing the gem to harness all of it into a force that would drive back the darkness. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the heart stone began to glow. Its light flickered, then surged with a brilliance that outshone the storm-clouded waters around them. The sickly green light that had suffocated the reef began to retreat, pushed back by the force of the heart stone's renewed energy. The once dying corals started to regain their color, their vibrancy returning as the power coursing through the gem spread throughout the reef. Adrian felt the shift, the light expanding outward, unraveling the sorcerer's magic, and for the first time since the battle had begun, he felt the oppressive weight of darkness begin to lift. They were winning, but it was only together that they could break the curse once and for all. The sorcerer's furious howl reverberated through the water, a chilling sound filled with rage and desperation. His form writhed, shifting and distorting as the heart stone's light pushed back the darkness that had once been his dominion. The very water around them seemed to convulse, reacting to the force of the magic clashing with the heart stone's brilliance. Yet, as the light intensified, the sorcerer's eyes burned brighter with malevolence. He was not ready to concede defeat. His power had been ancient, and he would not be undone so easily. The once vibrant reef now felt as though it teetered on the edge of destruction, caught in the balance between salvation and annihilation. The sorcerer's lips curled into a snarl as his dark magic swirled around him, coalescing into a swirling vortex of malevolent energy. The water began to boil, rippling with a sickly glow as the ocean itself seemed to recoil at his will. With a violent gesture, the sorcerer released his magic, unleashing it in a brutal tidal wave of shadow and fury. It surged toward them like a monstrous storm, the pressure from its force making the very air crackle with tension. Adrian and Serena braced themselves, feeling the full weight of the sorcerer's rage bearing down on them. It was as though the ocean itself was turning against them, the dark magic now a tangible presence, crushing the very water that had once been their ally. But Serena refused to falter. Her grip on the heart stone tightened, and with Adrian's strength at her side, they summoned every ounce of energy left within them. The light from the heart stone flared in defiance of the sorcerer's onslaught, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. The maelstrom of magic roared as it collided with the heart stone's energy, creating a violent, pulsing barrier of light and shadow. The water around them churned, twisted, and shook with the impact, but through the chaos, they held steady, their bond unbroken. The sorcerer's magic was fierce, but together, they were stronger. The light from the heart stone grew brighter still, pushing forward, determined to shatter the sorcerer's last attempt to reclaim the reef as his own. Serena and Adrian stood resolute, their connection unyielding in the face of the sorcerer's final onslaught. Their hands clasped around the heart stone, they channeled every ounce of strength, love, and determination into the gem. It pulsed with a brilliant light that seemed to grow with each passing second, its power surging like a beacon against the encroaching darkness. As the heart stone blazed with a radiance that rivaled the sun, its light cut through the sorcerer's magic with precision, burning away the tendrils of shadow that had once been his dominion. The water around them shimmered as the light spread, the darkness cracking like brittle ice beneath its heat. The sorcerer, once a towering figure of malice, began to tremble under the intensity of the heart stone's light. His form wavered, flickering like a fading mirage, his power no match for the combined force of the bond between Serena and Adrian. As the heart stone's glow reached its apex, the darkness surrounding him began to unravel, like the threads of a broken tapestry. The ocean itself seemed to reject the sorcerer's presence, the currents pushing him away as the light from the heart stone intensified, a blinding force that could no longer be denied. His eyes, once filled with fury and malice, began to dim, the life behind them fading as his physical form disintegrated, piece by piece. With a final, defiant hiss, the sorcerer's body shattered into nothingness, his power dissipating into the ether like smoke on the wind. The water around them calmed, the oppressive energy lifting as the last remnants of the dark magic were eradicated. The heart stone continued to glow, though now with a gentler light, its power stabilizing as the balance was restored. Serena and Adrian stood together, their arms still intertwined around the heart stone, breathing heavily but victorious. The reef, once tainted by the sorcerer's curse, was now free, its beauty restored, its future uncertain, but full of promise. The darkness was gone, and with it, the sorcerer's reign had ended, leaving only the tranquility of the restored waters behind. The sorcerer's scream echoed through the water, a final, desperate cry that reverberated across the reef as his form began to crumble away. His body, once powerful and commanding, unraveled in the face of the Heartstone's radiant force. The darkness that had clung to him began to dissolve like smoke in the light, leaving behind only the faintest remnants of the malice that had once defined him. His voice, filled with disbelief and fury, trailed off as if the very energy sustaining him was being torn away, his essence being consumed by the overwhelming power of Serena and Adrian's bond. His eyes, glowing with malignant intent only moments before, now flickered with a last flash of horror before they faded entirely. The water around them seemed to react to his unraveling, the oppressive energy that had once held it in thrall now evaporating into the currents. As his form continued to disintegrate, the shadow he cast over the reef receded, leaving the ocean clearer, purer, and free of the curse that had tainted it for so long. The dark magic that had flowed from him began to dissolve into nothingness, its grip on the reef finally broken. With every passing second, the sorcerer's presence grew fainter, his scream more distant, until it was nothing more than a whisper lost to the vast depths of the ocean. As the last of his body dissolved into the water, the sorcerer's words hung in the stillness, a faint echo of his defeat. "This cannot be," he had said, his voice full of disbelief and unspoken fear. But it was. The curse had been broken, the darkness eradicated, and the sorcerer's power was no more. The waters, once choked with his malignant influence, now pulsed with a quiet peace, their currents gentle and calm once more. Serena and Adrian stood at the center of the reef, the Heartstone still glowing brightly in their hands, their bond stronger than ever as they gazed upon the restored beauty of the reef. The battle was over, and the darkness had been vanquished. With a final, blinding burst of light, the sorcerer's form dissolved entirely, his presence vanishing from the waters as if it had never been. The dark magic that had once suffocated the reef was shattered in an instant, unable to withstand the intensity of Serena and Adrian's united strength. The oppressive energy that had weighed heavily on the ocean lifted, and in its place, a pure, radiant light flooded the reef, brighter than the sun's rays at their zenith. The Heartstone, glowing fiercely in their hands, pulsed with the power of their bond, and with it, the sorcerer's curse unraveled completely. As the light expanded, the transformation of the reef was immediate and awe-inspiring. The once faded corals, stripped of their vibrancy by the sorcerer's malice, now bloomed back to life in a burst of colors more vivid than before. Pink and purple hues shimmered in the sunlight, while greens and blues swirled like ribbons of living paint across the seabed. Fish, once driven away by the toxic energy, returned in swarms, their scales flashing in the sunlight as the water cleared. The once dying flora swayed gently with the currents, vibrant and thriving once again. The Heartstone's energy had breathed life back into the very heart of the reef, restoring it to its former splendor. The waters themselves seemed to rejoice, their depths no longer murky and dark but clear and full of possibility. The once muted sounds of the reef, silenced by the curse, returned with a symphony of life. Corals creaked as they expanded, fish fluttered through the water, and the gentle hum of a healthy ecosystem resumed its natural rhythm. Serena and Adrian stood at the center of it all, their hearts still pounding from the intensity of the battle, but now filled with a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. The curse was gone, the reef was free, and as the Heartstone continued to glow softly in their hands, they knew their journey had not only saved the reef, but had forever forged a bond between them, one that would withstand any challenge that lay ahead. Exhausted but triumphant, Serena and Adrian collapsed onto the now stable ground of the reef, their bodies shaking with the lingering tension of their battle. The Heartstone, still cradled in Serena's hands, emitted a soft, steady glow, its radiance now a comforting warmth instead of the blinding force it had once been. The pair sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of their victory settling in, their breathing slow but heavy. The water around them was calm, the once oppressive energy gone, leaving the reef feeling peaceful and restored. They had done it. After all the trials, all the struggles, they had finally broken the curse. The battle with the sorcerer had pushed them to their limits, testing not only their physical endurance but the strength of their bond. The doubt, and the desperation that had gnawed at Serena in the darkest moments of their struggle seemed like distant memories now. She looked at Adrian, his face worn with exhaustion but filled with a quiet pride. Their unity had been the key. Their connection, forged in the heart of the reef, had been powerful enough to face down the sorcerer's dark magic in triumph. It was something neither of them had expected, yet in that moment, it felt as if everything had led them here, to this point of absolute clarity. Adrian's heart still raced from the intensity of the final confrontation, his body aching from the effort of withstanding the sorcerer's onslaught. Yet, as he sat beside Serena, he felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. The reef was no longer shrouded in darkness. The creatures that had once fled from the depths were now returning, swimming cautiously but steadily back to their homes. The coral was alive again, vibrant and full of color, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the ocean seemed to breathe freely. It had all been worth it. The sleepless nights, the endless struggles, the uncertainty of whether they would succeed. Serena's mind replayed the final moments of their victory, the way their hands had locked around the heartstone, their wills and hearts aligned in one powerful surge of energy. It had been a gamble, a last-ditch effort when all seemed lost, but it had worked. They had unlocked something deeper than the magic of the heartstone, something rooted in their bond, in their shared purpose. It had not just been about breaking the curse, it had been about proving that together, they could overcome anything. The reef, the very symbol of the curse's hold, was now free, restored, and brimming with life once again. Though the immediate danger had passed, Serena knew their journey was far from over. The power they had unleashed, the depths of their bond, had changed them both. It had solidified their connection, forged a deeper understanding between them, and left them with a sense of purpose that they hadn't had before. The future was still uncertain, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges to face. But now, with the heartstone in their hands and the reef at peace, they were ready. Together, they had overcome the impossible, and nothing, not even the darkest forces of magic, could stand in their way now. As they lay on the soft, sun-kissed sands of the reef, the waters around them now tranquil and serene, Serena took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly ebb away from her muscles. The battle was over, and the peace that had returned to the reef was a reflection of the calm within her. The dark clouds of fear and uncertainty that had once loomed over them had dissipated, replaced by a bright, unbroken sky. It was hard to believe that just moments ago, they had been fighting for their lives against a force so powerful it seemed insurmountable. But now, the water lapped gently at the shore, and the vibrant marine life returned to their habitat, undisturbed. The oppressive energy had been replaced by a quiet, almost sacred stillness. Serena turned to Adrian, who lay beside her, his chest rising and falling in steady breaths, his expression soft yet filled with a quiet pride. Despite the weariness that clouded his eyes, there was a deep sense of satisfaction, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had accomplished. They had been pushed to the brink, faced the darkest forces the reef could conjure, and yet, in the end, it was their bond, stronger than ever, that had seen them through. Serena's heart swelled with gratitude as she looked at him, her smile a reflection of the unspoken words between them. There was no doubt in her mind that their shared journey had shaped them into something stronger, something unbreakable. They had fought not just for the reef, but for each other, and it had been worth every sacrifice. As the gentle breeze brushed across their faces and the sun's warmth wrapped them in its embrace, Serena knew that this moment of peace was hard-earned. The reef, once cursed and dark, now flourished with life once again, just as their bond had flourished amidst the challenges they faced. It was a new beginning, not only for the reef but for the both of them. No longer would the shadows of the past haunt them. Instead, they had forged a future together, one where they could face whatever the world had to offer with strength and unity. Together, they had survived the worst, and together, they would navigate whatever came next, forever side by side. As they lay there, the soft sounds of the ocean lapping against the shore, Serena and Adrian both knew that the path ahead would not be without its challenges. The reef was safe for now, but the world beyond it still held uncertainties, and the trials they had faced together were only a glimpse of the obstacles they might encounter in the future. Yet, instead of fear or hesitation, a sense of quiet determination filled them both. They had been tested in ways they never imagined possible, and each trial had only forged their bond stronger. Whatever came next, they would meet it not as individuals, but as a united force, their strength drawn from one another. The weight of their past struggles seemed to vanish as Serena glanced at Adrian, the steady rhythm of his breathing a reassurance. They had faced dark magic, powerful sorcery, and even moments of doubt, but together they had prevailed. Their connection was no longer just a matter of physical proximity or shared purpose. It had become something more profound, something unbreakable. Serena felt a deep, unwavering certainty that no matter how daunting the future appeared, they would always find a way through it. Their love, their unity, was the greatest force they possessed, and nothing would ever diminish its power. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the waters, Serena knew that this moment was not just an end but a beginning. The future was vast, filled with both unknowns and possibilities. But for the first time, she no longer felt the weight of fear pressing down on her. With Adrian by her side, there was no doubt in her heart. Together, they could face anything. The world ahead might be uncertain, but as long as they stood together, united in purpose and love, they knew there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The challenges that awaited them were simply the next chapters of their shared story, and they would face them as they always had, side by side. Chapter 35, A Desperate Plan. The waters around them were eerily calm, the storm that had once raged with such fury now nothing more than a fading memory. But Adrian, ever vigilant, knew that the battle was far from over. The Heartstone, still clutched in Serena's hand, pulsed faintly with a subdued glow, its power drained yet still present. The dark magic that had once suffocated the reef had been pushed back, its presence now a mere whisper in the depths. However, Adrian's instincts told him that the victory they had achieved was incomplete. The sorcerer's defeat had been only a part of the greater struggle. Something deeper remained, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to strike again. The faint glow of the Heartstone was a reminder of the unfinished ritual, its energy fragile yet still vital. Adrian's thoughts raced as he scanned the now still waters, every muscle in his body tense, prepared for whatever threat might emerge next. The curse had been broken, yes, but the true nature of the danger had always been more than a single battle. It was a battle for balance, for restoring harmony to the reef and ensuring the dark forces would never rise again. They had defeated the sorcerer, but the ritual's final steps remained, and without them, the safety of the reef would be uncertain. Adrian could feel the weight of their task still pressing down on them, the knowledge that only by completing the ritual fully would they secure the peace they had fought so hard to attain. Serena floated beside Adrian, her gaze fixed on the still waters beneath them, a mix of relief and unease etched across her features. The battle with the sorcerer had drained them both, the physical and emotional toll of the ritual weighing heavily on their bodies. Though the immediate danger had passed, and the oppressive storm had dissipated, the sense of victory was bittersweet. The reef, for the moment, appeared serene, but Serena knew better than to trust the calm. The curse had been weakened, yes, but not fully eradicated. They had only managed to hold the darkness at bay, and the danger lurking in the depths was far from over. As the Heartstone pulsed weakly in her hand, Serena's thoughts raced, the weight of their incomplete task pressing heavily on her. The ancient reef, with its vibrant life and intricate balance, was still fragile. The malevolent energy that had once plagued the waters had receded for now, but without completing the final steps of the ritual, they risked allowing the darkness to resurface even stronger. Serena could feel the uncertainty gnawing at her, the knowledge that they couldn't afford to rest on their laurels. Every moment they spent lingering in the aftermath was a moment the reef remained vulnerable. She turned to Adrian, silently urging him to focus. They had come too far to let the darkness reclaim what they had fought to restore. "We need to finish this," Adrian said, his voice low but resolute, a quiet fire burning beneath his exhaustion. Despite the weight of fatigue pressing against him, his resolve didn't waver. His eyes flicked to the Heartstone, still clutched in Serena's hand, its once vibrant glow now little more than a faint flicker beneath the dim waters. The stone had been their greatest ally, their the key to breaking the curse, but its power had been stretched thin in the battle. The ritual, as potent as it had been, had only scratched the surface. Without a way to fully restore the Heartstone's energy, their victory could be fleeting, and the danger they'd faced could return with a vengeance. Adrian's gaze hardened, his mind racing for solutions. They had come so far, fought so hard, but they weren't done yet. The ritual wasn't enough on its own. He continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. We need to find a way to fully restore the Heartstone's power and finish what we started. He glanced at Serena, his unwavering determination matching hers. Time was running out, and every moment they hesitated was another moment the darkness could return stronger than before. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, they couldn't afford to stop now. The reef, their bond, and the Heartstone all depended on them pushing forward, no matter how exhausted they were. Serena nodded, her expression tight with the weight of their predicament. The aftermath of their battle with the sorcerer still clung to her, the sting of his dark magic lingering in the depths of her bones. Despite the clarity of Adrian's words, doubt gnawed at her. The sorcerer's magic had come at them like a tidal wave, overwhelming them both in ways they hadn't anticipated. The Heartstone, their beacon of hope, now flickered weakly in her hand, its power drained from the prolonged assault. "But how?" she murmured, the question heavy with a mix of fear and frustration. "The sorcerer's magic nearly destroyed us, and we're running out of time. If we don't act now..." Her voice trailed off as she glanced at the still, dark waters around them, the once vibrant reef now eerily silent. It felt as if the ocean itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next wave of destruction. Despite her resolve, a sense of urgency tightened her chest. The task before them seemed almost impossible. There was no clear answer, no path laid out before them. But Serena could feel it deep in her gut. The Heartstone still held potential, the ritual had worked in part, and the bond between her and Adrian was the key. But how? She had no answer yet, only a burning need to act before the darkness crept back to reclaim what they had just fought to save. Adrian's mind raced, the weight of their situation pressing down on him with each passing moment. The prophecy had brought them to this point, a beacon that had guided them through every challenge. But now, they were adrift, with no clear direction and the stakes higher than they had ever been. The ancient reef, though momentarily safe, was still hanging by a thread. The Heartstone's weakened glow reflected the uncertainty that clouded his thoughts, and he felt the suffocating weight of their dwindling time. Each second spent searching for answers was a second the darkness had to regroup. But despite the chaos swirling around him, Adrian's thoughts began to sharpen, the fog of fear lifting just enough for clarity to break through. Then, like a flicker of light in the darkness, an idea began to take root in his mind, a desperate, risky plan that might just give them a fighting chance. His heart raced as he considered it, the very real possibility that it could either save them or doom them both. He turned to Serena, her eyes filled with the same exhaustion and uncertainty he felt. The plan would require more than just strength and will. It would test every ounce of their bond, pushing them to their limits. But with no other viable option in sight, Adrian knew they had no choice. The path was unclear, but it was the only one they had left. He steeled himself, determined to see it through, even if the cost was unimaginable. Adrian's voice was low and steady, though a flicker of unease passed through his eyes as he spoke. The Abyssal Trench was a place of legend, a forbidden area at the very edge of the reef, where the sea's power seemed to converge into something far darker and more volatile. It was said to be the source of the reef's ancient magic, both a cradle and a prison for the forces that shaped the coral and the creatures that inhabited it. Despite its importance, no one dared to approach it, for the trench was not just a geographic feature. It was a realm of raw, unrestrained energy, capable of twisting reality itself. But as Adrian's gaze fixed on the faint, flickering light of the Heartstone in Serena's hand, he felt a growing certainty. If there was any hope of restoring its full power, the Abyssal Trench was their last chance. Serena's heart skipped a beat as she considered the risk. The trench was a place of myths and warnings, a deadly place where the very air seemed to hum with foreboding. No one who ventured there ever returned unchanged, or sometimes at all. Yet Adrian's words struck a chord deep within her. They had already faced unimaginable dangers, and though fear gnawed at her insides, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the only path left to them. The reef, the Heartstone, and their own bond were all tied to that dark, mysterious trench. Serena's grip on the Heartstone tightened, its flickering glow seeming to pulse in response, as if urging them onward. "If it's the only way," she whispered, determination setting into her features, "then we have to go. Together." Serena's words hung in the water like a heavy cloud, the weight of them sinking deep into Adrian's chest. The abyssal trench was not just a place of danger, it was a place of death, a chasm that swallowed all who dared enter its depths. The currents in that area were legendary for their strength, capable of dragging even the most skilled swimmers into the dark abyss, where the pressure of the water was so immense it could crush the bones of any who ventured too far. But it wasn't just the relentless pull of the currents that made the trench so deadly. The creatures that dwelled in its shadows were older than the reef itself, ancient beings twisted by the raw magic of the deep, their forms so monstrous that the stories of them were whispered in fearful tones among the oldest tribes. Serena's voice trembled, not just with fear but with a deep understanding of the stakes. The trench was a place that no one, no matter how powerful, had ever escaped from, and the thought of confronting its horrors sent a shiver down her spine. Despite the fear that gripped her, Serena could see the resolve in Adrian's eyes. His unwavering determination, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, stirred something within her. She knew that there was no other choice. The Heartstone's faint glow in her hand was all the proof they needed that the ritual wasn't complete. "I know the risks," Adrian replied, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling around them. "But if we don't do this, the reef, the Heartstone, it will all be lost. We've already come so far." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything they had fought for. Serena swallowed hard, pushing her fear aside. She had seen what they were capable of together, and though the trench was a place of darkness, she knew they couldn't afford to turn away. "Not now." "Then we do it," she said, her voice firm, matching Adrian's resolve. "Together." Adrian's words were like a steady anchor in the storm of doubt swirling around Serena. His hand, warm and sure, grasped hers, grounding her in the moment. She could feel the strength in his touch, the determination that had never wavered, not even in the darkest of times. His conviction was unshakable, and though the abyssal trench was a place of unimaginable danger, Serena couldn't deny the truth in his words. The Heartstone still flickered weakly in her grasp, its power barely enough to protect them, let alone restore the reef. She had fought so hard to get here, to break the curse and save everything they had come to care for. Turning back now wasn't an option. The fear that had gripped her moments before began to ebb away, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. She looked into Adrian's eyes, seeing not just the weight of their shared struggle, but the unwavering trust they had in each other. They had faced impossible odds before and emerged stronger, together. "You're right," she said, her voice calm but resolute, the uncertainty fading into a focused determination. "We'll finish this, Adrian. Whatever it takes." With those words, they both knew there was no turning back. The path ahead would be treacherous, but they would face it side by side, united in purpose. Serena's gaze lingered on the abyssal trench, a chasm of inky blackness that seemed to pulse with an ancient, foreboding energy. The stories of sailors lost to its depths, of creatures beyond imagination lurking within, echoed in her mind. It was a place where the very ocean seemed to swallow all light, a gateway to the unknown that few dared to enter, and even fewer returned from. Yet, despite the overwhelming sense of dread that tightened her chest, she could feel the pull of something more, a bond with Adrian, a shared purpose that had brought them this far. She had witnessed his bravery, his willingness to face the impossible, and for a moment, the thought of retreating seemed inconceivable. Turning back to Adrian, Serena saw the quiet fire in his eyes, the same unyielding resolve that had carried them through their darkest moments. There was no room for fear now, not when the fate of the reef, and everything they had fought for, hung in the balance. She knew this was their only chance. and no matter the peril that awaited them, they would face it together. Serena exhaled slowly, her mind sharpening with clarity. "We're in this together," she whispered, her voice steady now, even in the face of the terrifying unknown. Together, they would plunge into the abyss. Serena's voice was firm as she spoke, the weight of their task pressing down on her. She could feel the urgency of the situation, the need to move swiftly before the dark forces of the reef gathered strength once more. Every moment spent in hesitation was a moment that the curse could regain its power, and she couldn't afford to let that happen. The abyssal trench was dangerous beyond imagination, a place where the ocean's deepest secrets were buried, but the Heartstone's restoration depended on them navigating its depths and finding what they needed. The risk was immense, but Serena knew there was no other path. If they wanted to save the reef, they had no choice but to press on. Adrian nodded, his jaw set with the same determination that matched her own. The weight of the challenge ahead was undeniable, but they had faced the impossible together before. Now, they would need to rely on each other even more than before. Serena could see the resolve in his eyes, mirroring her own, and she felt a flicker of hope. They had overcome every obstacle that had come their way, and this was no different. "We'll need to stay focused," she continued, her grip tightening around the Heartstone. "The darkness won't give up easily, but neither will we. Let's finish this." Adrian's mind raced as he outlined their plan, his voice steady despite the danger that lay ahead. The abyssal trench was a perilous place, and reaching its heart would require every ounce of their skill and strength. The currents there were known to be relentless, pulling even the most experienced sailors to their doom. But with the Heartstone in their hands, they might be able to harness the magic of the reef to steady their course. It was their best chance, though the risks were immense. Once they reached the core of the trench, they would have to pour everything into the Heartstone, channeling their energy and their bond to restore its full power. The gamble was high, but in this moment, there was no other option. Serena listened carefully, her heart pounding in her chest as Adrian spoke. The plan was dangerous, and there was no guarantee it would work, but she trusted him. They had always found a way together, and this time would be no different. As she glanced at the Heartstone in her hand, she could feel its faint pulse, a reminder of the hope they still held. If they could reach the heart of the trench and use the magic that lay within, they might finally break the curse for good. The stakes were higher than ever, and failure wasn't an option. With a determined nod, Serena met Adrian's gaze, her resolve firm. "Let's do it," she said. With a deep breath, Adrian and Serena began their descent toward the abyssal trench. The water around them darkened as they ventured deeper, the light from the Heartstone growing dimmer with every passing meter. The trench loomed ahead, its depths an ominous shadow that seemed to swallow the very light of the world. Every part of the ocean felt alive with ancient power, its energy both alluring and dangerous. The currents grew stronger, pulling at them as if trying to keep them from the heart of the abyss. But they pressed on, knowing that their fate was tied to the magic of the reef, and that the only way to restore the Heartstone's full power was to reach its deepest core. Their bond, the strength of their connection, was the only thing that would guide them through the treacherous waters. Serena felt a surge of determination course through her as she clutched the Heartstone, its pulse weak but still present. The journey had been long, and the sacrifices had been many, but this final challenge would determine everything. She could feel the pull of the trench, the powerful currents attempting to drag them off course, but she refused to let go of the stone. Adrian was right beside her, his resolve unwavering. Together, they would face whatever dangers lay ahead. The Heartstone might be flickering, but as long as they fought together, they still had a chance to restore it, to free the reef from the curse that had plagued it for so long. The trench was their last hope, and they would not turn back. As they descended into the depths, the world above seemed to vanish, leaving only the vast, suffocating darkness of the trench. The water around them turned cold, the temperature dropping with every meter they sank. The once vibrant hues of the reef gave way to an eerie, impenetrable blackness, as if the very essence of the ocean had absorbed all light. The currents became more violent, thrashing around them, urging them to turn back, to give in to the abyss's pull. But Serena and Adrian held fast, their grip on the heart stone steady despite the fierce resistance. Its faint, pulsing glow was their only beacon, flickering in the overwhelming dark like a fragile star. They could feel the weight of the trench, its oppressive presence pressing in on them, but their shared determination fueled their every movement. The deeper they went, the more disorienting the trench became. The water grew heavier, colder, as if the darkness itself was a living force, trying to suffocate them. Every few seconds, the currents seemed to shift, tugging in different directions, as if trying to drag them into the unseen depths below. Serena's breath quickened, the cold water biting at her skin, but she focused on the heart stone's light, letting its faint pulse guide her forward. Adrian was close behind, his eyes locked on the stone as it flickered with an almost desperate energy. The further they ventured, the more the ocean seemed to close in around them, but they refused to stop. The heart stone was their only hope, and with every ounce of strength, they pushed deeper into the trench, determined to reach its heart and restore the magic before it was too late. The trench was every bit as treacherous as the legends had promised. Unseen creatures stirred in the darkness, their bodies shifting through the shadows like specters of the deep. Every now and then, pairs of glowing eyes would flicker in the gloom, watching with an intelligence that seemed almost unnerving. The creatures, grotesque and ethereal, slithered past them, their movements fluid and unnatural, vanishing into the murk before they could fully be seen. The water around them was thick, oppressive, laden with a heaviness that weighed down on their bodies and minds. Every stroke felt harder, as though the very depths of the trench sought to pull them into its cold embrace. It was a place untouched by light, untouched by time, where the forces of nature twisted in ways they couldn't begin to understand. The magic in the trench was unlike anything Serena had ever felt before. It pulsed around them, swirling with an energy that felt both ancient and alive. The air, if it could even be called air beneath the water, was charged with an unseen force, a hum of power that vibrated through their bones. It was as though they were swimming through the very fabric of the ocean's mysteries, every inch of the trench steeped in forgotten magic and dark secrets. The heart stone in Serena's hand seemed to respond to the energy, its light flickering erratically as if struggling to adapt to the strange, alien forces at play. Every breath felt harder to take, and each stroke forward seemed to drag them deeper into a world they were not meant to enter. Yet they pressed on, the pull of the heart stone and the desperate need to restore its power pushing them forward through the labyrinth of ancient, untold forces. At last, they reached the heart of the trench, a vast and foreboding chasm that seemed to swallow the very light around them. The water here was no longer just cold and dark, it thrummed with raw, untamed power, as though the ocean itself had become a living, breathing entity. The energy in the depths crackled like static in the air, sending jolts of unease through their bodies, and making the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Every movement they made stirred the water, but it felt as if the trench itself was watching, waiting. The sense of ancient power was overwhelming, and the silence was broken only by the sound of their own labored breathing. The heart of the trench was a place where time and space seemed to bend, as though they had crossed into a realm that was both part of the world and yet wholly separate from it. As they descended further into the abyss, the water became thick with an almost tangible magic, distorting the very air around them. The boundaries between the physical world and the magical realm had all but disappeared. Serena could feel the magic crawling across her skin, not with the warmth of life but with the cold, distant touch of something older, something that had existed long before the world they knew had come to be. The heart stone pulsed erratically in Serena's hand, its glow weak and uncertain, as if it too struggled to comprehend the power swirling in the depths. The walls of the chasm seemed to pulse in time with the stone, vibrating with an energy that was not meant for mortal beings. In this place, it was as if reality itself was suspended, a thin veil between the known and the unknown, waiting for them to act before the forces beyond their control consumed them entirely. "This is it," Adrian said, his voice barely audible above the deafening roar of the currents that whipped around them. The trench seemed alive, pulsating with an energy so powerful that it felt as though the very water itself could tear them apart. His eyes met Serena's, filled with a fierce determination that mirrored her own. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The heart stone flickered weakly in Serena's hand, its light dim and fragile, but still holding the potential for the power they so desperately needed. The currents threatened to pull them deeper into the chasm, but they both knew that the only way out, the only way to restore the reef and break the curse once and for all, was to tap into the very core of their strength, and to place everything they had into the stone. Serena nodded, her heart pounding as she steadied herself, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. The magic of the trench wrapped around them like a living, suffocating thing, but she knew Adrian was right. They had faced impossible odds before, and together, they had always found a way. This time would be no different. She reached out, her fingers closing around the heart stone as she felt the warm hum of its energy course through her. She could sense the magic pulsing within, responding to her connection with Adrian, to the bond they had formed through their trials. But it wasn't enough yet. They needed to combine everything, their energy, their resolve, and their love, and pour it into the stone, in the hope that it would ignite with the power to defeat the darkness that had plagued the reef for centuries. The stakes had never been higher, and there was no room for failure. Serena nodded, her grip tightening around the heart stone as a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, the uncertainty of their plan gnawing at her resolve. The energy surrounding them felt almost alive, as if the trench itself was watching, waiting for them to falter. She glanced at Adrian, searching his face for reassurance, but she saw the same determination that had been there from the start. There was no turning back now. The heart stone pulsed faintly in her hand, its glow a fragile beacon in the overwhelming darkness. But she couldn't shake the thought, what if they poured everything into the stone, and it wasn't enough? What if this last gamble, this desperate effort, only fueled the magic of the trench, drawing them further into its grip? Adrian met her gaze, his expression unshaken, though his own mind was filled with the same questions. The fear of failure was a burden they both carried, but he knew that the risk was their only option. They had already come so far, overcome so many obstacles together, and to turn back now would be to surrender everything. If it doesn't work, he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them, then we fight until we can't fight anymore. But I believe in us, Serena. I believe in what we've built, and I believe that together, we can make this work. His words, though simple, carried the weight of everything they had endured and the hope of what they could achieve. Serena took a deep breath, drawing strength from him, from their shared bond. There was no more room for doubt. Together, they would either restore the heart stone or face whatever came next, but they would do it side by side. Adrian looked at her, his expression unwavering, his resolve as solid as the stone they held between them. The turbulence of the trench, the darkness pressing in from all sides, seemed to fade as he spoke those words. In that moment, everything felt singular, focused, their bond, the heart stone, and the perilous path they had chosen. His gaze met hers, and in his eyes, Serena saw no hint of hesitation, only an unshakable trust. They had weathered every storm, crossed every impossible threshold together, and now, with the heart stone pulsing faintly between them, they stood on the precipice of their final challenge. There was no turning back, no room for fear. They were in this together, and no matter what the trench threw at them, they would face it side by side. Serena's heart steadied as his words settled within her, a calm in the midst of the chaos. The doubts that had once threatened to overwhelm her began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet strength she had only found when they were together. She tightened her grip on the heart stone, feeling its fragile glow pulse in sync with her heartbeat, and nodded in agreement. Together, she repeated, her voice steady now, infused with the same unshakable certainty she saw in him. The power of the trench surged around them, but their bond, deeper and stronger than any magic they had encountered, anchored them. Whatever was to come, they would face it with everything they had, knowing that together, there was no force they couldn't overcome. They positioned themselves at the edge of the chasm, their bodies braced against the violent pull of the trench's raw power. The heart stone pulsed between them, a beacon of fragile light in the overwhelming darkness. The energy of the trench thrummed with an ancient, almost sentient force, wrapping around them like tendrils, probing and testing. The currents lashed at their limbs, the pressure of the water pushing against them as if to force them into the abyss. Every fiber of their being screamed in resistance, but they held firm, united by the silent vow that had carried them through every challenge up to this moment. As they stood on the brink, the very air felt charged, thick with the weight of magic older than time itself. It was as if the ocean was alive, watching, waiting, testing their will. The trench seemed to be alive with intent, daring them to make the final leap into its depths, to risk everything in the name of restoration. The force around them was almost suffocating, as if the ocean itself were aware of the stakes and sought to drown their resolve. But even as the trench's power threatened to overwhelm them, Serena and Adrian's hands remained steady on the heartstone. Together, they summoned all their strength, their minds and hearts linked by a single purpose: to overcome the darkness that had plagued the reef for so long. "Now," Adrian said, his voice steady as the tension in the air seemed to freeze for a moment. His gaze was fixed on Kale, unwavering, as if he were reading the storm within him. There was a quiet authority in his tone, not demanding but firm, as though he knew the weight of what needed to be done. Adrian's posture was relaxed, yet every muscle in his body was poised for whatever came next. Despite the chaos that had surrounded them, there was a calming certainty in his presence, a stark contrast to the unpredictability of the world outside. His eyes, dark and intense, met Kale's with a silent understanding, a bond forged through the trials they had faced together. The air between them was thick with the unspoken trust that had been built, layer by layer, through their shared experiences. Kale felt a shift, something deep within him that resonated with Adrian's unwavering stance. The storm inside him, the one that had been swirling with doubts and fears, seemed to quiet in the face of Adrian's calm certainty. There was no need for further explanation, no need for words to fill the gap between them. Kale knew, without question, what Adrian meant, what this moment called for. The weight of the situation still hung heavy in the air, but with Adrian's quiet command, it felt manageable, even surmountable. Kale took a deep breath, his gaze softening as he steadied himself. He had always trusted Adrian. Now, more than ever, he knew that together they could face whatever came next. Together, they synchronized their thoughts, their hearts, and the very essence of their beings, channeling every ounce of their energy into the heartstone. It was as if time itself slowed, their worlds narrowing down to that single moment, that single connection with the powerful artifact. The stone, dormant for so long, began to hum softly at first, a low vibration that resonated deep within them. As they poured their collective strength into it, the stone's glow flickered to life, faint at first, then growing steadily in intensity. Its light began to pulse, vibrant and almost otherworldly, as it absorbed the raw energy of the trench that surrounded them. The currents of water, once a gentle force, now writhed violently, as though reacting to the power being unleashed. The very depths of the ocean seemed to tremble as the stone grew brighter, casting an eerie, radiant glow in every direction, its energy surging outward like a beacon. But as the stone absorbed more power, the sea around them became a maelstrom, the currents whipping with fury, as if trying to tear them away from their focus. The pressure of the water threatened to crush them, the force of the waves almost too much to withstand. Still, they held firm, bodies pressed together, their bond stronger than the storm that raged around them. Kale and Adrian's hands remained tightly locked around the stone, their muscles straining, but their resolve unyielding. The power of the trench fought against them, but it was nothing compared to the force of their unity. With each passing moment, their shared will pushed back the chaos, their connection becoming a steady anchor in the turmoil. The light of the heartstone grew brighter, more unyielding, as they drew upon the very heart of the ocean, their trust in each other the only thing keeping them from being consumed by the fury of the sea. The heartstone's light blazed with an intensity that eclipsed everything around it, a brilliance so pure and powerful that it seemed to outshine the very darkness of the trench. The shadows that had once cloaked the deep waters began to recede, retreating from the surge of light like a storm being pushed away by the rising sun. The energy of the stone crackled through the water, vibrant and alive, casting sharp beams of radiant glow that illuminated every crevice and cavern in its reach. As the light expanded, the very fabric of the trench seemed to pulse in response. as if the depths themselves recognized the arrival of something ancient and powerful. It was as though the ocean had been waiting for this moment, holding its breath as the heart stone awakened. The currents shifted and swirled around them, not with the fury of the storm, but with a rhythmic, almost reverent flow, as the magic of the reef seemed to align itself with the light. In that moment, the energy surged through their bodies like an unstoppable wave, linking their minds, hearts, and souls into a singular force. Their thoughts melded together, and for a brief, fleeting instant, they felt as though they were one, united not just in purpose, but in essence. The Heartstone's power coursed through them with an intensity that was almost overwhelming, but instead of fear, there was a profound sense of clarity, of understanding. The magic of the reef, ancient and untamed, intertwined with the prophecy that had bound them to this moment, while the strength of their bond, founded in trust, love, and shared experience, anchored them, steady and unyielding. Everything, every choice, every sacrifice, every step they had taken, culminated in this pure, blinding moment of light. It was a manifestation of their journey, of everything that had led them here, and as it grew brighter, more intense, the world around them seemed to dissolve into nothing but the radiance, a force greater than any one of them, yet intimately their own. With a final, explosive surge of energy, the Heartstone shattered, its brilliant light fracturing in 1,000 directions like shards of a broken star. A massive wave of raw, uncontainable power erupted from the stone, sending ripples of energy cascading through the trench and surging outward into the reef. The force of the release was like the ocean itself had taken a deep breath and then exhaled, a breath that carried the weight of centuries of waiting. The water around them trembled, the currents twisting and spiraling in response to the stone's final, cataclysmic pulse. The once oppressive darkness that had clung to the reef for so long dissolved in an instant, swept away by the pure, cleansing force of the stone's light. The shadows receded, as if they could no longer survive in the presence of such brilliance, leaving behind a renewed world bathed in the glow of their victory. The curse that had plagued the reef and its inhabitants for so long was finally, completely broken. It had been a weight on the land, a stain on the water, a curse that had lingered far too long, but now it was nothing but a memory, erased in the wake of the Heartstone's destruction. The reef, once shrouded in despair, now pulsed with new life, the magic of the ocean vibrant and healing in the stone's absence. The once muted colors of the coral and seaweed began to bloom in hues more vivid than ever before, as though the very life of the ocean was celebrating its freedom. And beneath the surface, there was a profound stillness, a peace that had been absent for ages, filling the waters and the hearts of those who had fought to see this moment. The darkness, the fear, the curse, gone. In its place, only light and hope, the future of the reef now untouched by the shadow of its past. Exhausted but victorious, Adrian and Serena drifted in the now tranquil waters, their bodies barely moving as the weight of their journey settled in. The tumultuous currents that had once threatened to tear them apart had calmed, leaving behind only a stillness that spoke of the battle's end. Their breaths were slow and heavy, each one a reminder of the strain they had endured, but there was no fear now, only the deep satisfaction of knowing they had achieved what seemed impossible. The Heartstone's remnants, now little more than fragmented pieces, gently sank into the depths, disappearing into the dark expanse below. It was as if the ocean itself had claimed the last traces of its ancient power, and with that, the weight of their mission was finally lifted. The waters around them, once charged with oppressive energy, now felt weightless, as though the very fabric of the abyssal trench had been released from its centuries-old burden. The abyssal trench, once a place of darkness and mystery, now lay in peaceful silence, its brooding power spent. The secrets that had lingered in its depths, twisted and hidden for so long, were finally laid to rest, no longer to haunt the reef or the world above. It was a place transformed, no longer the prison of its past but a quiet testament to the triumph of those who had come to face its terror. The waters were clear, the oppressive weight of the curse lifted, and the oppressive force that had held sway over the trench was no more. In the eerie calm that followed, there was a sense of closure, of something profound having ended. For Adrian and Serena, it was more than just the completion of a task. It was the peace they had fought so hard to bring to a place that had long suffered in silence. The abyssal trench was no longer a place of torment. It had become a place of rest, where even its deepest secrets could finally fade into the deep, forgotten. They had done it. The weight of the words hung in the still water, the quiet echo of their victory resonating through their minds. The curse was broken, the reef saved from the darkness that had threatened to consume it for so long. It was an achievement that seemed impossible in the beginning, but now, as they hovered in the calm waters, it was a reality. The once feared abyssal trench was no longer a place of danger. Instead, it had become a symbol of their triumph. The reef, once choked by the curse's grip, now shimmered in newfound life, its vibrant colors returning to the coral and seaweed, its waters restored. There was a profound peace that settled over them, a silent acknowledgement that they had achieved something monumental, not just for the reef, but for themselves. As they began the long journey back to the surface, a quiet sense of contentment filled the spaces between them. The currents that once felt oppressive now seemed gentle, almost soothing, as though the ocean itself was guiding them home. But amid the relief and the peace, they knew something deeper had been forged between them. The bond they shared, the bond that had carried them through every trial, every moment of doubt, was stronger than ever. It was more than just an alliance formed in the face of danger. It was a connection that had grown from mutual respect into something far deeper. They moved together in perfect synchrony, each knowing what the other needed, each providing strength when the other faltered. It was a partnership built not only on their shared purpose but on a trust that had been tested and proven in the deepest, most perilous waters. As they made their way to the surface, the promise of what they had achieved together lingered between them, unspoken but understood. And though the heart stone was gone, its light lived on within them, an enduring presence that neither time nor distance could diminish. The stone's power, once contained within its fragile form, had now become a part of them, woven into the very fabric of their beings. Its glow no longer radiated from a physical source, but from within, shining brightly in their hearts and minds. It was a quiet, steady light, a beacon that would never flicker out, no matter the darkness that might come. The strength they had drawn from the heart stone during their trials was now something they carried with them, a gift that transcended the object itself. The light had become an inseparable part of their journey, guiding them even in their moments of uncertainty. A reminder that they were never alone, that they had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. This inner light was not just a symbol of the magic they had unlocked or the power they had wielded. It was a reflection of their resilience, their unity, and their unwavering commitment to one another. It was a bond forged through adversity, stronger and more unyielding with each passing challenge. No matter what the future held, they now knew that they had the strength to overcome it. The heart stone had given them a gift beyond its physical power. It had shown them what they were capable of when they stood together. And with that gift, they faced the unknown future with a newfound certainty. The light within them would guide them, just as it had led them to this victory. And with it, they would find their way through whatever shadows might linger on the horizon. Chapter 36. The Final Confrontation. The sea roiled with an unnatural fury, its waves crashing violently against the once stable reef as though some malevolent force had awakened within the deep. The water churned with a relentless energy, twisting and surging as if it were alive, responding to some unseen command. The once calm surface had transformed into a chaos of frothing waves, each one crashing with greater force than the last, as though the ocean itself was rebelling against the peaceful stillness it had known moments before. The salt water sprayed into the air, stinging like icy needles, and the currents seemed to grow stronger with every passing second, threatening to pull everything back into the depths from which it had just emerged. It was as though the sea had been disturbed, and its anger knew no bounds. Above them, the sky was no better, dark and oppressive, swirling with clouds that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The storm that had gathered was unlike any natural tempest, its energy crackling with a strange and ominous force. The air was thick with tension, the kind of heaviness that pressed against the chest and made it hard to breathe. Bolts of lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the clouds in sharp, jagged flashes that lit up the world for brief, blinding moments. Thunder rumbled deep in the heavens, a low, threatening growl that echoed across the water, as if the very atmosphere had been set aflame with dark magic. The storm was no mere weather event, it was a manifestation of something darker, something ancient that had stirred in the wake of the ritual's completion. The calm that had settled over the trench after the Heartstone's power had been released was now shattered, replaced by a suffocating sense of impending doom. It was as though the world itself had shifted, the equilibrium disrupted by the very forces they had set into motion. A cold fear crept into their hearts, not from the storm itself, but from the realization that something far more dangerous was at play. The earth seemed to tremble beneath them, and the ocean's depths fell deeper, darker, as though something was stirring, waking from a long slumber. What had once been an accomplishment now seemed tainted, overshadowed by the uncertainty that loomed overhead. The storm was a warning, a herald of something that was not yet finished, and whatever it was coming for them. Adrian gripped the hilt of his sword with a firm, unwavering hand, his knuckles pale against the dark metal as his eyes remained fixed on the horizon. There, on the distant edge of the sea, the storm was gathering its strength, swirling with unnatural intensity. The once-calm waters were now a battleground for the elements, the waves crashing higher, their crests jagged like the teeth of some ancient beast. He could feel the tension in the air, the oppressive weight of the storm pressing down on him. His body was taut, every muscle coiled in preparation, instinctively drawn to the danger that loomed just beyond the horizon. There was no time to question what would come, only to face it head-on. His grip on his sword was more than just a reflex. It was a silent vow to stand his ground, no matter what threat emerged from the depths of the storm. Beside him, Serena stood just as resolute, her posture straight and unwavering, but her gaze betrayed the unease gnawing at her. The flicker of fear in her eyes was fleeting, quickly masked by the determination that followed, but it was enough to show the weight of what they were about to face. Her hands were clasped together, her fingers curled slightly as though bracing against an invisible force. The wind whipped through her hair, tugging at her clothes as she turned her eyes back to the horizon. She, too, could feel it, the presence of something far older and far more dangerous than anything they had encountered before. The Heartstone's destruction, while it had freed the reef from its centuries-old curse, had unknowingly awakened a far greater evil, one that had slumbered beneath the waves, waiting for just this moment. The moment the stone was shattered, the seal had been broken, and now there was no turning back. The power that had been unleashed was unlike anything they had ever faced, a force rooted in the deepest shadows of the world. The Heartstone's destruction had freed the reef, yes, but it had also freed something else, a dark and ancient presence that had laid dormant for centuries, its influence festering in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike. The very waters around them seemed to hum with this newfound threat, the air thick with an almost palpable malevolence. Adrian and Serena knew that the battle they had won was not the end, but the beginning of something far worse. The storm wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a manifestation of the force they had awakened. The battle that had just begun would test not only their strength but their very will to survive against the power that had waited for centuries to break free. They had no choice but to face it together, knowing that the stakes had just risen to a level they could never have anticipated. "They're coming," Serena whispered, her voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the wind. Her words were barely a breath, yet they cut through the tension in the air with a sharp clarity. She could feel it now, the unmistakable presence of dark forces drawing nearer, like an unseen tide slowly creeping up on the shore. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, each gust of wind seeming to carry with it the weight of something ancient and malevolent. The horizon was a blur of swirling clouds and thunder, the storm intensifying as if it, too, sensed the impending arrival of the darkness. Despite the chaos of the storm, a quiet stillness settled in her chest, a foreboding calm that screamed of danger drawing closer, faster. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, a pressure that built with each passing second, squeezing the air from her lungs. As the force drew closer, the very atmosphere seemed to change. The wind shifted, a deep, oppressive chill creeping into the air, biting at her skin even through the layers of her clothing. Her heart raced, the rhythm frantic in her chest as the weight of what was coming grew heavier. It was as though the world around her was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to be unleashed. The ground beneath her feet felt unsteady, the sea still churning violently. But now, even the waves seemed to bow under the invisible pressure closing in from all sides. The sense of impending doom thickened the air, each heartbeat echoing louder in her ears as she instinctively reached for her sword, its reassuring weight a small comfort against the growing terror. The darkness wasn't just a shadow, it was an entity, and it was drawing nearer, as if the very fabric of reality was starting to unravel in its wake. Serena's breath came in shallow gasps, her chest tightening as the suffocating weight pressed against her like a physical force. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to flee from whatever was coming, but she stood rooted to the spot, her eyes locked on the horizon. She knew that running would accomplish nothing. This was no storm, no ordinary force of nature. The darkness that approached was something far older, something far more dangerous than anything they had yet faced. It was as if the storm itself had become a harbinger, a messenger for a greater evil that had been awoken. The power of it vibrated in the air, wrapping around her, seeping into her very bones. She could feel it closing in, the final moments before the reckoning, and in that instant, she realized that the true battle was about to begin. She wasn't just waiting for the storm to arrive, she was waiting to face the very heart of the darkness itself. Adrian nodded, his expression hardening with resolve as he stared out at the encroaching storm. His jaw was set tight, the muscles in his face working beneath the strain, as if he could already feel the weight of the battle ahead pressing down on him. The wind howled louder, but it was nothing compared to the roar of determination rising within him. His grip on the hilt of his sword tightened, the familiar weight a silent promise to himself and to Serena. There was no turning back now. The forces they had once only sensed in fleeting moments were here, descending upon them with a fury that would test everything they had fought for. But in this moment, Adrian found clarity. Despite the uncertainty and the danger, there was no question in his mind about what they had to do. He would face whatever was coming, whatever horrors lay beyond the storm, with Serena by his side. The bond between them was unspoken, but it was as tangible as the earth beneath their feet. Adrian could feel it in the air between them, in the way Serena stood tall beside him, her own resolve solidifying in the face of the storm. The flicker of fear that had passed through her moments ago had settled into something more determined, more fierce. She was ready. He could see it in her stance, in the way her hand hovered near her weapon, prepared to strike when the time came. They were a team, bound not only by the shared trials they had endured but by the unwavering trust they had built in each other. Together, they had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. This time would be no different. The storm and the dark forces could come, but Adrian knew they would meet them head-on, their strength combined, their purpose clear. "We'll face them together," Adrian said, his voice steady and firm. The words were more than a promise. They were a declaration of their unity, an unshakable truth that the storm could not break. As the wind whipped around them, his voice carried with a force that defied the chaos, reaching Serena with the clarity of a vow. The darkness might be gathering, but it would not divide them. They had come this far, and they would go further, side by side, to protect what they had fought so hard to preserve. The moment stretched, the weight of it hanging in the air, before Adrian stepped forward, his gaze never leaving the storm, the flickering shadows that now loomed at the edge of the sea. With Serena beside him, he was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they were stronger than anything that could come for them. The water around them began to churn violently, the once calm and steady currents now whipped into a frenzied turmoil. The waves crashed with ferocity, the sea itself seemingly rebelling against the stillness that had once reigned. The dark, turbulent waters surged higher, their crests frothing with unnatural energy, as if some immense force was rising from the depths below. Adrian and Serena stood firm, their bodies bracing against the power of the ocean's wrath, but even they could feel the heavy weight of the shifting tide pressing in around them. It was no longer just the storm that threatened them, it was the presence of something far more sinister, something that had been lurking beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to strike. The very ocean seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if the sea itself was being pulled under the grip of something ancient and powerful. From the depths of the abyss, they saw it, the figures they had feared, rising from the darkened waters like shadows made flesh. They emerged slowly, their forms indistinct, cloaked in swirling tendrils of darkness that seemed to bend the very light around them. The creatures were like phantoms, their bodies shifting and warping, too elusive to define clearly, as though the darkness itself had come alive, taking on form in a twisted mockery of life. Their presence filled the water, suffocating the space with an overwhelming sense of dread. Every movement they made sent ripples through the sea, distorting the water and warping reality itself. The figures were not solid, but neither were they purely ethereal. Each one seemed to exist in a liminal space between the worlds, their shapes flickering in and out of existence, impossible to fully comprehend or escape. As they drew closer, their eyes glowed with a malevolent, unholy light, a sickly hue that pierced the darkness like shards of ice. It was a gaze that burned with hatred, with an ancient, unfathomable rage that seemed to seethe with the fury of ages long past. Their eyes locked onto Adrian and Serena, cold and knowing, and in that moment, the very air seemed to grow colder, the space between them thick with dread. The sound of their voices echoed around them, not in words but in whispers, low, guttural, and haunting, voices that seemed to come from the very depths of the ocean, carrying with them the weight of the damned. The whispers twisted in the air, promises of pain, of ruin, and of the end of all things. The figures spoke without words, but their presence, their eyes, and their whispers conveyed everything that needed to be understood. They were here to finish what had been started, and no force would stop them. "You dared to defy us?" One of the shadowy figures hissed, its voice slithering through the air like a serpent, cold and venomous. The words wrapped around them, thick with malice, as if the very sound of them carried the weight of 1,000 years of wrath. The figure's form twisted in the shadows, its movements serpentine and fluid, its edges blurring in and out of focus like a mirage. The air seemed to tremble with the force of its words, each syllable laced with an ancient, unnatural power. The creature's eyes gleamed, glowing like embers in the dark, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow, their focus drawn entirely to the menacing figure before them. There was no escape from the confrontation. The shadows had already claimed this space, and every ounce of the ocean's power seemed to echo the threat that reverberated from its hollow voice. "The curse was our creation," the shadow continued, its tone dripping with bitter pride. It loomed closer, its presence a suffocating force, as though the very darkness it emanated was an extension of the cursed bond it spoke of. A bond that could not be broken, not by any mortal, not by any force that dared to challenge the ancient laws we set in place. Its voice seemed to warp, echoing in their minds, as if it was speaking not just through sound but through the very fabric of their consciousness. The shadows around them writhed, alive with the energy of the curse, recalling the long-held grip it had over the reef. The weight of the past pressed in on them, the sins of the ancient curse wrapping around their hearts like chains, threatening to drag them back into the abyss of darkness from which it had emerged. "Yet you have meddled with forces beyond your understanding," the figure hissed, its eyes narrowing with a mix of fury and contempt. The words sliced through the air, punctuating the depth of their transgression, a declaration that they had crossed a line that could not be undone. The darkness seemed to pulse with an almost tangible anger, the very water around them growing colder, thicker, as if the ocean itself recoiled at their interference. Serena could feel the weight of the accusation in the air, the full extent of the danger they had unwittingly invited upon themselves. The shadows were no longer simply figures. They were an ancient force, a malignant will that had waited in the depths for this very moment, and it would not be so easily defeated. The price for their actions had just begun to reveal itself, and in that instant, they realized how deeply they had disturbed a power that no mortal had any right to challenge. Adrian stepped forward, his movements precise and deliberate, the weight of his resolve steadying his every action. The dim light of the storm-fueled sea cast jagged reflections across his sword, its blade gleaming with a cold, unwavering light, as if it too had sensed the gravity of the moment. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, even as the dark figures loomed before him, their presence oppressive and suffocating. His grip tightened around the hilt of the weapon, the familiar weight grounding him, centering him in the face of the ancient threat that had risen from the depths. Every fiber of his being screamed with the desire to protect, to finish what they had started, and with his every step toward the figures, he made his declaration. This was not a battle he was willing to lose. He was not going to allow the darkness to win. His voice rang out with authority, firm and unwavering, cutting through the oppressive atmosphere like a blade of its own. "We broke your curse, and we'll finish what we started," Adrian said, his words carrying a weight that matched the blade in his hand. The wind howled around them, but it was drowned by the conviction in his voice. Serena stood beside him, her own gaze locked on the figures, but it was Adrian's words that anchored them both, a challenge thrown into the abyss. The very air seemed to quiver in response, as if the shadowy figures had not expected such defiance. But Adrian was undeterred. He had felt the darkness coil around the reef, seen the destruction it wrought, and he knew that now, standing at the edge of the abyss, they had to be the ones to stop it. The curse might have been broken, but the true battle was still to come, and Adrian would not let it drag them back into the void. "You won't harm this reef or anyone else ever again," Adrian continued, his voice lowering but growing no less intense. His eyes burned with a fierce determination, not just for victory, but for redemption, for the lives that had been shattered by the curse and for the future of the reef that now depended on their courage. His words struck like a vow, carrying the weight of the promise that he and Serena had made to the creatures of the reef and to the world they both sought to protect. The shadows that surrounded them writhed in response, a tremor of anger rippling through the air. But Adrian's stance remained strong, unyielding. This was a fight that was no longer just about survival. It was about righting the wrongs of the past and ensuring that nothing, not even the ancient shadows of the deep, could threaten the peace they had fought so hard to restore. With a final, resolute breath, Adrian prepared himself for the battle that was sure to come, knowing that this time, he would not back down. The shadow figures laughed, a sound so hollow and distorted that it sent an icy shiver crawling down Serena's spine. It was as if the very air around them thickened, the laughter reverberating through the water like the screech of some ancient creature, echoing from the deepest recesses of the abyss. Each laugh was laced with disdain, an unfathomable cruelty that seemed to pierce the soul itself. Serena's heart pounded in her chest, her hand tightening around her weapon as she fought to steady herself against the overwhelming presence of the dark figures. The sound was like a warning, a reminder that they were standing in the presence of something far older and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The laughter seemed to curl around them, coiling in the corners of her mind, mocking her and Adrian for daring to believe they could defeat it. "Foolish mortals," one of the figures sneered, its voice a slithering hiss that seemed to vibrate the very water around them. The words were spoken with a venom that dripped from every syllable, as if the figures saw their challengers as little more than insects to be crushed beneath their weight. Their forms flickered and shifted, growing more indistinct with each movement, as if the very darkness they emanated was alive, feeding off their arrogance. Serena's grip on her sword tightened even further, her muscles tensing, but the figure's cruel words seemed to press in on her, suffocating her resolve. There was a realization dawning in her mind. This battle was not as simple as they had hoped. The curse had only been the beginning, and they were about to face something far worse than they had prepared for. "The Heartstone was only a part of our power," the shadow continued, its voice growing colder, more menacing. "The true source of the curse lies within us, and it cannot be destroyed so easily." The words echoed in the air, each one weighing heavier than the last, as if the very concept of defeat was foreign to the figures. The water around them seemed to shift in response, swirling with a new intensity, as if the curse itself was alive and growing stronger with every passing second. Serena's stomach twisted with the realization that they had been naive, that they had thought breaking the Heartstone was the final step. The darkness they faced now was deeper, more ingrained in the very fabric of this world. The figures stood as a testament to an ancient power, a force that had been entwined with the reef for centuries, and it was far more resilient than they had ever anticipated. The true battle, Serena realized, was only just beginning. Serena's heart sank at their words, the realization of their true power crashing down upon her like a wave. The shadows surrounding them seemed to grow deeper, more suffocating, as the figure's taunts reverberated in her chest. A sense of hopelessness clawed at her, threatening to unravel everything she and Adrian had fought for. Yet, even as the cold fingers of despair reached toward her heart, she refused to yield. She had seen too much, endured too much, to let this be the end. Her thoughts steadied, and with a deep, deliberate breath, she pushed the fear aside. There was still strength within her, still a spark of the power that had once protected this place. She would not falter now, not when so much was at stake. The dark forces hissed in anger, the sound almost tangible, vibrating through the very water that surrounded them. It was a hiss that seemed to come from everywhere, a collective noise that filled the space with an unsettling, primal fury. Their figures twisted and writhed, morphing into shapes that grew ever larger, more monstrous, as though the very act of their rage was warping them, making them into something more than shadow. The tendrils of darkness that curled around them lengthened and expanded, coiling like serpents ready to strike. As they surged forward, their movements were fluid and terrifying, each step an echo of the malevolent energy that pulsed from within. Adrian could feel the temperature of the water drop, the suffocating presence of the figures closing in on them, and for a brief moment, he feared that the shadows might overwhelm them entirely. The ocean itself seemed to respond to their fury, the once steady currents now violently whipping around them. The water churned and thrashed, as if it had become a battleground, and the waves rose higher, cresting with an almost unnatural force. Serena felt the power of the ocean shifting, the raw energy of the sea vibrating in every fiber of her being. The water around them seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive, as if it, too, was caught in the thrall of the dark figure's rage. The waves crashed down with greater intensity, their roar drowning out everything else, as if the ocean itself was retaliating, fighting to push the darkness back. The figures fed off the turmoil, their forms growing ever more distorted with every wave that slammed into them. But the energy they exuded only served to fuel the storm, making it worse, amplifying the threat they posed. The battle between light and dark was no longer confined to their wills alone. It was being fought in the very heart of the ocean. Adrian and Serena stood firm, their feet rooted in the shifting water, their senses attuned to the chaos around them. The dark forces were closing in, their malevolent power building with every passing second, but the pair refused to yield. They were the last line of defense, and they would not allow the sea to be overtaken. As the waves crashed around them, Serena drew on every ounce of her magic, the light around her intensifying as she fought to push back against the overwhelming tide. Adrian stood resolute, his sword raised high, the gleam of the blade a stark contrast to the darkness that loomed. Together, they faced the advancing shadow, the ocean itself a mirror of their battle, two forces locked in a fight for survival. But even as the darkness surged toward them, they knew one thing: they would not let it consume the reef, no matter the cost. Adrian braced himself, every muscle tensed in preparation for the oncoming surge of darkness. His sword was gripped tightly in his hand, its hilt slick with seawater, but its weight felt familiar, grounding him in the chaos that raged around them. The faint light from Serena's magic flickered in the distance, casting an ethereal glow on his face, but even that seemed insignificant in the face of the approaching storm. His eyes narrowed, scanning the shifting shadows that loomed just beyond the edge of his vision, and for a moment, he was reminded of every battle they had faced together, every moment of doubt and fear they had overcome. The looming figures would be the greatest challenge yet, but they had faced impossible odds before. They would do it again. With a deep breath, Adrian steeled himself, his heart beat in sync with the crashing waves around them, and in that moment, he was more certain than ever they would not falter. "Stay close," Adrian said, his voice steady and commanding, though beneath the calm exterior, the adrenaline was building, a rush of heat spreading through his veins. He glanced at Serena, his gaze meeting hers with quiet intensity, willing her to understand the weight of his words. They had always been stronger together, and this moment would be no different. The ocean was a force of nature, but they, too, were a force to be reckoned with. Serena's magic had been the key in breaking the curse. Now it would be their combined strength that would hold back the darkness. The shadows moved, swirling with malice, but Adrian stood firm, knowing that with their bond, they could withstand even the darkest of storms. His heart pounded with the knowledge that this was it, the final push, the last stand to save everything they had fought for. "We'll need to combine our strength, just like before," Adrian continued, his voice unwavering despite the maelstrom around them. The words were not just a plan, they were a promise. Every word carried the weight of their shared history, every battle they had fought side by side, every victory they had claimed. They had learned to work in unison, their strengths complementing each other in ways that went beyond mere physical power. Serena's magic was an extension of the ocean itself, a force that could shape the world around them, while Adrian's sword was the steady, unyielding blade that cut through any obstacle in their path. Together, they formed a balance, a harmony of light and steel that no darkness could hope to overcome. As the shadows lunged forward, Adrian's grip on his sword tightened. They would fight together, and they would win. Serena nodded, her heart pounding in her chest as she steadied her breath. The air around her seemed charged with energy, and she could feel it humming beneath her skin, a deep, resonating power that had been growing inside her ever since the ritual. It was an unfamiliar sensation at first, wild and untamed, like a storm on the edge of her consciousness. But now, it was a part of her, a force she could control if she only focused enough. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, letting the magic course through her veins like a river finding its path. It was a power not just drawn from the ocean, but from the very heart of the reef, from everything it had protected and nurtured for centuries. The energy was vast, almost overwhelming, but Serena welcomed it. She had learned to embrace it, to harness its strength when it mattered most. As the power inside her surged, Serena reached out with her mind, her senses, extending her focus toward Adrian. She could feel his presence beside her, solid and unwavering, his strength anchoring her own. The bond between them had always been a quiet force, a silent understanding that they were better together. It was this connection, this unspoken partnership, that allowed their magic to intertwine seamlessly. Her eyes flickered to him, catching his gaze for a brief, silent moment. She didn't need words to communicate the trust she had in him, the certainty that they could overcome anything as long as they stood together. The flicker of his own magic was like a mirror of hers, a steady, guiding flame in the storm that surrounded them. Together, they would become more than the sum of their parts. They would be unstoppable. Serena's focus sharpened, her fingers twitching with the raw power that now hung beneath her skin. She let her energy expand, flowing outward like a thread connecting them, linking her magic to Adrian's with a sudden, electrifying intensity. Her breath caught as the magic began to intertwine between them, her power feeding into his strength grounding hers. It was a delicate balance, a perfect synchronization that had become second nature to them. She could feel the forces of the ocean stirring around them, as if the very currents were bending to their will, and in that moment, Serena knew they were ready. The darkness that threatened to consume everything would have to face them both, united in their strength, and she was determined that it would not win. Their hands clasped together, fingers intertwining with a strength that came from more than just the physical touch. It was the joining of their very spirits, their essences merging into one. In that instant, Serena and Adrian's connection deepened beyond words, their hearts beating in synchrony, their breaths aligning with a shared purpose. The magic they had once harnessed separately now flowed through them as a unified force, seamless and powerful, like the surge of a tidal wave crashing against the shore. The energy between them pulsed, growing in intensity, resonating with a force that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality around them. It was as though the ocean itself had lent them its power, and the strength of the reef, the Heartstone's legacy, and their unbreakable bond all combined to create something unstoppable. The warmth of their shared magic surrounded them, a protective shield that shielded them from the suffocating darkness creeping ever closer. Reaching deep within herself, Serena drew on that lingering energy, the remnants of the ancient magic that had once shielded the reef from harm. She could feel it, faint but familiar, pulsing within the very currents of the ocean. Her fingers tingled with the power of it, and she whispered an incantation under her breath, her voice a soft hum that mingled with the sound of the waves. Slowly, the water around her began to react, responding to her call. The darkness that had seemed to dominate the space started to retreat, its hold loosening as the faintest glow began to spread from Serena's outstretched hand. The light was soft at first, almost fragile, but it grew steadily, a quiet but defiant force that illuminated the water around her like the first light of dawn. The glow intensified, its warmth seeping into the depths of the ocean, a stark contrast to the cold shadows that pressed in on them. Serena's heart beat in rhythm with the pulse of the water, a steady flow of power that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. The light spread further, coiling around her like an embrace, filling the space with a gentle, luminous energy. It wasn't the full force of the Heartstone, but it was enough. The darkness recoiled, as though it couldn't bear the touch of the light. Serena's eyes narrowed in focus, her magic growing stronger as she called on the last remnants of the reef's ancient protection. Her resolve hardened like iron, and she knew that no matter how deeply the shadows sought to bury them, she would stand firm, pushing back against the tide until the last flicker of light had driven them away. "We won't let you win," Serena said, her voice cutting through the suffocating silence, strong despite the fear that gnawed at her insides. Her words trembled on the edge of defiance, yet she held her ground, staring unflinchingly at the shadowy figures before her. Each breath she took felt heavier than the last, the oppressive presence of the dark figures pressing down on her, but she refused to be swayed. The air seemed thick with the weight of their power, and the shadows flickered like smoke in the wind, but Serena's gaze never wavered. She knew the stakes of this battle, felt the enormity of what they were up against. But more than that, she felt the strength of the ocean around her, the unseen currents of life that pulsed beneath the waves. And she understood, in the deepest part of her being, that she couldn't allow this darkness to claim what was precious. The reef, the ocean, the very life that thrived within it, none of it would fall under their shadow. The words rang out again, firm and unwavering. This reef, this ocean, and everything within it are worth fighting for. Serena's heart surged with purpose as she spoke, each syllable a declaration of everything she held dear. Her hands, glowing with the remnants of the ancient magic, spread wide as if to embrace the very waters that had nourished and protected them. Around her, the water shifted, the currents responding to her call, as if the ocean itself was listening, standing with her in this fight. The weight of the reef's legacy, the countless generations of creatures and life that had flourished here, was now in her hands. Her voice carried, a beacon of hope in the midst of a storm, reverberating through the water and into the very depths of the abyss. She knew that the darkness threatened to swallow them whole, but she also knew the power of the sea, the strength of the world that had survived for centuries. She wasn't alone in this fight. "We will end your reign of terror." The final words echoed through the water with a force that seemed to push back against the shadows. Serena's resolve burned brighter now, fueled by the belief that this battle, no matter how dire, could be won. The darkness had ruled here once, but it had been broken, and Serena would see to it that it would never rise again. With every ounce of energy she had, she drew upon the ocean's vast, unyielding strength, her magic a flickering flame that would not be extinguished. Her heart pounded in time with the rising tide, each wave of light pushing back the encroaching shadow. The figures before her might have thought they had the upper hand, but Serena's words and the power of the reef would prove otherwise. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of the ocean, for every living thing that called it home, and she would not let it fall into darkness again. A blinding light erupted from them, pure and radiant, pushing back the oppressive shadows that threatened to swallow them whole. The brilliance of it was staggering, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the blackest night, burning with a ferocity that made the very water around them shimmer and ripple in waves of light. It was a force unlike anything they had summoned before, both their magic and the ocean's power woven together into a single, blinding strike. The light surged outward, cutting through the murky darkness, illuminating the vast expanse of the trench with a force that was almost physical. For a heartbeat, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Everything, from the shifting waves to the very breath in their lungs, held in suspension as the light moved to reclaim the space that had once been lost to shadows. They were not just fighting back the dark, they were reclaiming what had been stolen, restoring balance to a world on the brink of destruction. The shadowy figures recoiled, their forms twitching and warping as the searing light bore down on them. A guttural hiss escaped from one of the figures, and then another, a sound that reverberated through the water like the screech of a tortured beast. The darkness writhed, twisting and contorting in pain, as though the light was a poison, searing through their very being. They had been born from the void, but now, as the light cut through them like a blade, their forms began to falter, disintegrating at the edges. The hissing grew louder, desperate, as though the very foundation of their existence was being unraveled by the purity of the light. The figures shrank back, their malevolent presence weakening with each passing moment. The combined force of Adrian and Serena's magic, the light of their unity, was a force far more powerful than anything the shadows had anticipated. They could feel it, the darkness faltering, retreating, unable to withstand the overwhelming brilliance that now surged through the waters. But the dark forces were not so easily defeated. Despite the blinding light that had surged through them, they regrouped with a malevolent force, drawing from the very depths of their power. The shadows that had been pushed back began to reassemble, swirling and shifting with unnatural precision, like tendrils of a dark storm gathering on the horizon. The water around them seemed to darken as the darkness thickened, the once shimmering surface now obscured by an oppressive, suffocating veil. The figure of each shadow became indistinct, merging into something far more terrifying, a massive, writhing mass that loomed over the reef, its presence like a suffocating cloud. The very ocean seemed to recoil from it, as if the forces of nature themselves were repelled by the magnitude of the darkness now taking shape. The air grew colder, the pressure mounting as if the ocean itself was holding its breath in dread. "You cannot destroy us," the dark force snarled, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from every shadow in the mass. The words vibrated through the water, carrying a venomous certainty that sent a shiver down Serena's spine. There was a chilling finality to their tone, as though they knew, deep down, that this was not just a battle of magic. It was a battle for something far older and far darker than anything they had faced before. The shadows twisted, expanding outward, their edges blurring into a sickening haze that seemed to seep into every corner of the ocean. "We are eternal," the voices hissed in unison, an overwhelming sound that filled the space with a sense of doom. The darkness pulsed with a life of its own, and for a moment, Serena felt the weight of their words settle like a cold stone in her chest. This wasn't just a force of nature, it was a force of existence itself, one that had endured through time, lurking beneath the surface of the world, waiting for the perfect moment to rise again. "We are the darkness that dwells in every heart, the fear that never dies," they continued, their voice now merging into one, an endless chorus of malice and ancient power. The mass of shadow seemed to expand, its presence growing with each word, swallowing the light that had been fighting back the tide. The very fabric of reality around them trembled under the weight of their words, as though the darkness was speaking not just to them, but to the very ocean, the very earth, reminding them of a truth they had long since forgotten. Serena's grip on her magic tightened, but the shadowy force before them only seemed to grow stronger, feeding off their fear, off the uncertainty that flickered in their hearts. She could feel it then, the slow, creeping doubt that threatened to take root. These were not mere creatures of the dark, they were embodiments of something deeper, older, and far more dangerous. And yet, in the face of that overwhelming power, Serena knew they could not give in. This was their fight, their world to protect, and no matter how eternal the darkness claimed to be, they would stand firm, refusing to let it consume everything they loved. Adrian's fingers tightened around Serena's hand, the pressure a steady anchor in the midst of the rising chaos. His heart raced in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins, but there was no hesitation in his grip, no sign of faltering. The weight of the shadowy force before them pressed down on him, a suffocating force that threatened to crush all hope, but Adrian stood firm, unwavering. His gaze never left the writhing mass of darkness that loomed above them. He could feel the magic pulsing through Serena's hand, a quiet, steady rhythm that mirrored his own resolve. Together, they had weathered storms, fought battles both external and internal, and now, with the very fate of the reef at stake, Adrian knew they could not, would not, give in. This darkness might be ancient, eternal even, but their bond was just as strong, and he would not let it break. The weight of the words felt like a vow as they left his lips, his voice steady despite the terror that sought to claw at the edges of his mind. "Then we'll fight you until there's nothing left." The finality in his tone, the unyielding certainty of it, echoed in the stillness that followed, a challenge that rang louder than any roar of the storm. In the face of such overwhelming evil, there was a strange kind of clarity in Adrian's heart. He knew there would be no retreat, no surrender. This was the moment they had fought for, the culmination of everything they had endured. He could feel the weight of Serena's power beside him, the two of them a force to be reckoned with, and the thought steadied him. They were not alone in this fight. The reef, the ocean, the very magic of the world around them was on their side. As he spoke, Adrian's mind raced through every possible outcome, but he cast them aside, focusing instead on the present, on the here and now. The darkness before them wasn't just a threat, it was a test of everything they had fought to protect, everything they had come to value. His sword, still gripped tightly in his hand, was a symbol of his commitment, but it was Serena's magic that would light their way. Together, they could defeat this evil, not just by the strength of their powers, but by the strength of their bond, their shared purpose. The shadows may have claimed to be eternal, but Adrian knew this moment, this fight, was theirs. With Serena at his side, he would fight until the last breath, until the darkness was no more. There would be nothing left for it to claim. Nothing. With a deafening roar, the shadowy mass surged forward, its tendrils of darkness whipping through the water like writhing serpents, each one reaching out with malevolent intent. The very air around them seemed to thicken as the mass of shadows advanced, its immense power distorting the world around it, warping the space with every movement. The blackness seemed to stretch endlessly, a void that swallowed the light and chilled the very bones. Each tendril writhed and lashed through the water with terrifying speed, moving toward them with a predatory hunger. The shadows were more than mere darkness. They were alive, a sentient force determined to crush everything in its path. Adrian could feel the overwhelming presence of it, the weight of an ancient evil bearing down on them. But even as the darkness drew nearer, there was no fear in his heart. He knew what he had to do. Beside him, Serena's magic flared to life, a radiant light that contrasted sharply against the encroaching dark. With a single, sharp breath, she drew on the power within her, the energy that had been building since the ritual, and summoned it to her hands. The water around them began to glow with an ethereal light, the magic flowing from Serena in waves, each pulse a beacon against the encroaching evil. Adrian, feeling the surge of her power, joined his own magic to hers, the energy of the reef blending with their combined will. Together, they focused their strength into a single point, a concentrated force of light that shimmered in the heart of the ocean, radiating outward. The barrier they created was a tangible force, a shield of pure light that pushed back against the darkness, as if the very fabric of reality itself was being woven into their defense. The tendrils of shadow that reached for them recoiled in the face of the barrier, hissing in fury, but the light was unyielding, expanding to hold them at bay. For a moment, there was stillness, an eerie calm that hung in the air as the shadows lashed and recoiled against the light. The tendrils strained against the barrier, their twisted forms pressing in, desperate to break through. But Adrian and Serena stood resolute, their eyes locked on the writhing mass, their hands still firmly clasped together. The magic between them hummed with the intensity of their shared resolve, growing stronger with every passing second. The darkness, despite its overwhelming strength, could not penetrate the light they had forged together. It seethed and fumed, but it was powerless in the face of their united front. Adrian felt the energy from Serena surge through him, an unspoken promise that they would not be broken. With their combined strength, they had created a barrier that was as much a testament to their bond as it was to their determination. The shadows would not take the reef, not while they still stood. The battle raged with an intensity that seemed to shake the very core of the reef, the clash of light and dark creating an unstoppable force that reverberated through the water. The ocean, once calm and tranquil, now churned violently, as though the elemental forces themselves were caught in the struggle between the two opposing powers. Waves slammed against the reef with unrelenting fury, crashing against its jagged cliffs and sending spray into the air like the roar of 1,000 storms. The water around them was a swirling tempest, thrashing with the force of the shadows that fought to break through the against dark, hope against fear, each moment bringing more destruction to the reef. Yet Adrian and Serena's resolve never wavered. The storm itself seemed to bend to their will, a reminder of the immense power they wielded together. They were fighting not just for the reef, but for the world itself, and the weight of that truth only made their magic burn brighter. Adrian's sword flashed with brilliant light as he swung it, each strike infused with the energy of the reef and the strength of his will. His muscles burned with the effort, every movement sending shockwaves of power through the water, but there was no slowing him down. The shadowy tendrils came at him with merciless speed, but each one was met with the searing light of his sword, disintegrating upon contact. His focus was unyielding, each slash a promise to protect the reef, to stand beside Serena against the darkness that sought to consume them. He could feel the power of Serena's magic beside him, a constant, radiant force that flowed from her with every breath. It was as if their combined strength had become a living thing, an unstoppable current that surged and pulsed with life. They moved in perfect synchrony, their every action a reflection of their shared purpose, their bond growing stronger with each challenge they faced. Beside him, Serena's magic flared to life, a radiant light that contrasted sharply against the encroaching dark. With a single, sharp breath, she drew on the power within her, the energy that had been building since the ritual, and summoned it to her hands. The water around them began to glow with an ethereal light, the magic flowing from Serena in waves, each pulse a beacon against the encroaching evil. Adrian, feeling the surge of her power, joined his own magic to hers, the energy of the reef blending with their combined will. Together, they focused their strength into a single point, a concentrated force of light that shimmered in the heart of the ocean, radiating outward. The barrier they created was a tangible force, a shield of pure light that pushed back against the darkness, as if the very fabric of reality itself was being woven into their defense. The tendrils of shadow that reached for them recoiled in the face of the barrier, hissing in fury, but the light was unyielding, expanding to hold them at bay. For a moment, there was stillness, an eerie calm that hung in the air as the shadows lashed and recoiled against the light. The tendrils strained against the barrier, their twisted forms pressing in, desperate to break through. But Adrian and Serena stood resolute, their eyes locked on the writhing mass, their hands still firmly clasped together. The magic between them hummed with the intensity of their shared resolve, growing stronger with every passing second. The darkness, despite its overwhelming strength, could not penetrate the light they had forged together. It seethed and fumed, but it was powerless in the face of their united front. Adrian felt the energy from Serena surge through him, an unspoken promise that they would not be broken. With their combined strength, they had created a barrier that was as much a testament to their bond as it was to their determination. The shadows would not take the reef, not while they still stood. The battle raged with an intensity that seemed to shake the very core of the reef, the clash of light and dark creating an unstoppable force that reverberated through the water. The ocean, once calm and tranquil, now churned violently, as though the elemental forces themselves were caught in the struggle between the two opposing powers. Waves slammed against the reef with unrelenting fury, crashing against its jagged cliffs and sending spray into the air like the roar of 1,000 storms. The water around them was a swirling tempest, thrashing with the force of the shadows that fought to break through the radiant barrier Adrian and Serena had created. The very elements seemed to be at war, light against dark, hope against fear, each moment bringing more destruction to the reef, yet Adrian and Serena's resolve never wavered. The storm itself seemed to bend to their will, a reminder of the immense power they wielded together. They were fighting not just for the reef, but for the world itself, and the weight of that truth only made their magic burn brighter. Adrian's sword flashed with brilliant light as he swung it, each strike infused with the energy of the reef and the strength of his will. His muscles burned with the effort, every movement sending shockwaves of power through the water, but there was no slowing him down. The shadowy tendrils came at him with merciless speed, but each one was met with the searing light of his sword, disintegrating upon contact. His focus was unyielding, each slash a promise to protect the reef, to stand beside Serena against the darkness that sought to consume them. He could feel the power of Serena's magic beside him, a constant, radiant force that flowed from her with every breath. It was as if their combined strength had become a living thing, an unstoppable current that surged and pulsed with life. They moved in perfect synchrony, their every action a reflection of their shared purpose, their bond growing stronger with each challenge they faced. Serena, too, was relentless, her magic expanding outward in radiant waves that pushed back the shadows with each burst of energy. Her hands moved gracefully through the water, drawing symbols of power in the air, her fingers leaving trails of light that cut through the darkness like a blade. Each pulse of her magic seemed to grow more powerful, more refined, as if the energy of the reef itself had become one with her. She could feel the darkness pressing against her, trying to claw its way through her defenses, but she refused to yield. Her heart was as strong as her will, and she channeled every ounce of her determination into the battle. The light around them flared with blinding brilliance, pushing back the encroaching dark, and for a moment, Serena felt an overwhelming surge of power, a sense of clarity that told her they were on the cusp of victory. With Adrian by her side, their combined forces were more than a match for the ancient evil that sought to destroy them. The darkness might have been eternal, but their strength, their unity, was a force far more formidable. The shadowy mass writhed and twisted, its form splintering under the relentless assault of light. The darkness, once a solid and menacing presence, now faltered, its edges dissolving like smoke in a fire. Each pulse of light from Serena and Adrian's combined magic cut through the blackness, tearing at its twisted shape. The shadows screeched in agony, their unearthly cries echoing through the water, vibrating in the very bones of the reef. It was as though the darkness was alive, a living thing that had been wounded, and its thrashing became more frantic, its tendrils lashing out wildly in a desperate attempt to hold on to its form. But with every strike of light, the shadows unraveled more, their power waning, unable to withstand the growing intensity of the magic they faced. The ocean around them seemed to ripple with the force of the battle, the water itself trembling under the weight of their struggle. The dark forces screamed in rage and pain, their voices merging into a haunting cacophony that reverberated through the depths. But even their fury could not stop the tide of light pushing against them. Each movement of the shadowy mass seemed more sluggish, more disjointed, as though it was being held together by sheer force of will alone. The tendrils, which had once been swift and sharp, now flickered like dying embers, their edges fading as if the light was burning them away from the inside. Adrian and Serena stood at the center of the maelstrom, their hands still joined, their combined power the only thing holding the darkness at bay. Every breath they took seemed to fuel the magic, their bond growing stronger as the light intensified, creating an unyielding barrier between them and the remaining shadows. The screams of the dark forces grew more dissonant, their cries less certain, as if they knew their end was near, that their time in the world was coming to a close. It was as though the very essence of the reef had come alive, fighting alongside them to banish the darkness once and for all. The magic of the ocean, once dormant, now surged with an energy that matched their own. Serena could feel it, the pulse of the reef's heart, beating in time with her own, a resonance that spoke of an ancient power deep within the ocean's depths. The light around them was not just their own, it was the very soul of the sea, the ancient, enduring force that had kept the darkness at bay for centuries. With each burst of light, it was as if the reef itself was pushing back against the encroaching void, summoning every last ounce of its strength to protect the world it had guarded for so long. The water around them shimmered, alive with the magic of the reef, as though the ocean itself had taken up arms against the dark, lending them the power they needed to finish this battle. The darkness, once so certain of its victory, was now crumbling, its power dissolving as the light grew brighter, stronger, more unstoppable. With a final, resounding roar of power, Adrian and Serena unleashed a surge of magic that erupted from them like a tidal wave of light. Their combined strength poured into the strike, their magic converging into a single, blinding pulse that shot through the heart of the shadowy mass. The very ocean seemed to hold its breath as the light collided with the darkness, the impact sending shockwaves through the water, rippling outward in every direction. The shadows twisted and buckled under the force, their form beginning to unravel as the pure energy of the light tore through them. For a brief moment, there was an eerie silence, nothing but the suspended tension of the moment, before the darkness shattered in a violent explosion of sparks, each one fizzing out like dying embers. The air was thick with the residual energy of their magic, crackling with the remnants of the battle, but the darkness was no more. The ocean's surface rippled with the final echoes of the clash, the last vestiges of shadow fading into nothingness. The storm that had raged overhead, its violent winds and churning clouds, seemed to breathe its last breath. The tumultuous skies began to clear, the darkness retreating as quickly as it had come. The oppressive weight that had hung over them, the sense of impending doom that had suffocated the air, lifted as if some great unseen hand had swept it away. The storm clouds, heavy and swollen with malevolent energy, began to break apart, dissipating into thin wisps of mist that vanished into the blue expanse above. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the world felt still, an unnatural peace settling over the ocean as the magic of the battle slowly faded. It was as though the land, the water, and the air were taking a collective breath, savoring the calm that had returned after the chaos. The very elements seemed to rejoice, the wind now soft and gentle, the waves quiet and lapping against the reef in a serene rhythm. And then, as if the world itself had been reborn, the light of dawn broke through the dissipating clouds, spilling over the horizon in a flood of golden warmth. The first rays of the sun painted the ocean in hues of orange and pink, casting a soft glow over the reef. The water shimmered, now clear and calm, its depths once again untouched by the darkness that had plagued it. The coral, vibrant and alive, seemed to breathe in the light, their colors richer than they had ever been. Serena felt the weight of the battle lift from her shoulders, the tension in her body melting away with the return of peace. Adrian, too, could feel the change, the exhaustion that had gripped him now tempered by the quiet triumph of their victory. Together, they watched the dawn break over the sea, the final remnants of the battle dissipating with the fading shadows. The world was still and beautiful, a reflection of the light they had restored. It was over. The fierce battle that had raged against the shadows, the violent clash between light and dark, had finally come to an end. Adrian stood, panting heavily, his body aching with the weight of the fight, but his heart was light. Serena, beside him, was equally exhausted, but there was a quiet triumph in her eyes. The darkness that had once consumed the reef, that had spread its insidious tendrils throughout the waters, had been defeated. It had been a battle like no other, one that had tested their limits, stretched their powers beyond anything they had imagined, but they had succeeded. The evil that had threatened everything they held dear had been vanquished, its power broken by the unyielding strength of their bond, the intensity of their shared magic. In that final moment, when they had released the blast of light that had torn through the heart of the darkness, Adrian had felt it, the moment the shadows crumbled and disintegrated, their essence scattering like ash in the wind. The reef, once darkened by the curse, now shimmered with an almost palpable vibrancy. The sea, calm and clear, seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The once ominous and twisted coral was now vibrant and alive, its colors rich and glowing with the light that had returned. The waters had settled, the currents gentle once more, as if the ocean itself had been reborn. The ancient magic of the reef, which had been obscured and twisted by the dark forces for so long, had been restored to its rightful place. Serena could feel it, too, the deep, resonant hum of the ocean's power, alive and thriving beneath the surface, as though the very heart of the reef had awakened. The air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed, and it felt more alive than ever. The curse that had plagued the land, the sea, and all the creatures within it was now broken, leaving behind only peace. Serena turned to Adrian, her eyes shining with gratitude, love, and exhaustion. They had done it. They had faced the darkness together, and now the reef was safe, its ancient magic restored. It was a victory not just for them, but for the entire ecosystem that depended on the balance the reef provided. The weight of the battle, the toll it had taken on both of them, seemed to fade as the magic of the reef wrapped around them like a protective embrace. Adrian, too, felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing they had not only preserved the reef but had also freed it from the ancient grip of darkness. The world felt still now, calm, and for the first time in a long while, serene. They stood together on the edge of the reef, their bond stronger than ever, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as they always had, united and ready to protect the magic they had fought so hard to restore. Breathing heavily, Adrian lowered his sword, the weight of the battle finally lifting from his shoulders. His body ached with the intensity of the fight, the strain of every swing, the exhaustion from the magical force he had wielded, and the tension that had built in every moment of uncertainty. Yet, despite the fatigue that clouded his limbs, there was a deep, undeniable sense of relief that washed over him. The darkness that had once threatened to consume everything was gone, shattered by their combined strength. He glanced at Serena, her face flushed with exertion but her eyes glowing with the same shared triumph. Her grip on his hand remained firm, grounding him in the midst of the quiet that had descended over the reef. They had faced the impossible, and together they had won. The echoes of the battle slowly faded into the distance, leaving behind only the soft lapping of the waves against the reef's jagged rocks. Serena's breath came in ragged gasps, her chest rising and falling as the last remnants of the magical energy they had unleashed faded from her. She turned her gaze to the horizon, where the first light of dawn filtered through the dissipating storm clouds, casting a soft, golden glow over the tranquil waters. The ocean, once wild with fury, now lay calm, its depths still, its surface peaceful. The shadows that had plagued them, the forces that had tried to tear their world apart, had been obliterated, leaving only the restoration of the balance they had fought so hard to protect. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a quiet joy that only came after a hard-won victory, and yet there was an exhaustion that weighed on her too. The battle had taken everything out of her, but the relief that flooded her chest made it all worth it. She turned her gaze back to Adrian, her heart full, and nodded softly, as if to say she too recognized the enormity of what they had just accomplished. "We did it," Adrian said, his voice a low, relieved murmur as he met her eyes. There was a slight tremor in his words, a testament to the overwhelming mix of emotions that surged through him: pride, relief, gratitude, and a deep sense of awe at what they had just overcome. His sword, now lowered and gleaming faintly in the growing light of day, seemed a distant memory, its weight insignificant compared to the bond they had forged in battle. The world around them, once full of chaos and darkness, was now beginning to heal. Their fight had not only saved the reef, but it had also strengthened their connection, proving that together they could face any darkness, any challenge. Serena squeezed his hand tighter, her silent agreement clear. The battle was over, the darkness defeated, and the reef was safe once more. They had not only survived but had triumphed, and that shared victory would remain with them forever. Serena nodded, her gaze fixed on Adrian, her eyes shimmering with the overwhelming mix of joy and exhaustion that filled her. She could feel the weight of the battle lifting from her, replaced by an intense relief that seemed to radiate from the very core of her being. The tears that welled up in her eyes weren't just from the physical toll of the fight or the emotional strain. It was the culmination of everything they had endured together. Her body trembled, not from fear or pain, but from the sheer release of tension. The last remnants of their magic still hummed faintly in the water, a testament to their victory, but the reality of their success had yet to fully sink in. The reef was safe, the darkness banished, and in that moment, Serena realized just how deeply their bond had grown. Through everything, through the storms, the shadows, the fear, they had made it. And now, standing side by side with Adrian, she felt the full weight of their triumph. For a moment, Serena's world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, their hands still clasped tightly together. The ocean around them, now calm and peaceful, mirrored the stillness in her heart. It had been such a long, harrowing journey, but here they were, standing together in the light of a new day. She squeezed Adrian's hand, her grip filled with both gratitude and unspoken words. The magic, the power they had shared, had been their lifeline, but it was their trust in each other that had truly carried them through. Every challenge they had faced had only served to strengthen their resolve, and now, as the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, it was impossible to deny the magnitude of what they had accomplished. The world felt different now, like it was holding its breath in the aftermath of a storm, waiting to bloom into something brighter. "We did," Serena said, her voice soft but steady, as if affirming not just their victory but the bond that had made it possible. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had fought for. In that one sentence, there was the promise of everything they had shared and the knowledge that they were no longer just two individuals fighting against the odds, but a united force that had, together, reshaped the future. Tears slid down her cheeks, not out of sorrow, but out of a deep sense of fulfillment. They had won, not just for themselves, but for the reef, for the ocean, and for everything that had been threatened by the darkness. The battle was over, but their journey was far from finished, and as Serena stood there beside Adrian, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger than ever. As the first rays of sunlight began to stretch across the horizon, they kissed the surface of the ocean with a warmth that seemed to ignite the very waters beneath. The reef, once dark and haunted by the curse, now pulsed with a soft, radiant glow, as though it were coming alive with the new day. The delicate coral shimmered in hues of pink, gold, and vibrant blue, each shade brightened by the sun's touch, its colors more vivid than they had ever been. The water itself seemed to hum, alive with the magic of renewal, the ancient energy of the reef no longer corrupted by darkness. It was as if the ocean was breathing in the light, embracing the transformation that had come with the end of the curse. The air was clear, the once heavy, oppressive atmosphere now filled with a sense of calm and possibility, as though the world had been given a fresh start. Adrian and Serena stood side by side at the edge of the reef, their bodies still trembling from the battle, but their hearts now lighter than they had ever felt. They had fought not just for their lives, but for something much greater, the very balance of the world that had been teetering on the edge of ruin. They had faced the darkest forces and had come out on the other side, not just as survivors, but as victors. The bond they had forged in the heat of battle, the magic they had combined, was something unbreakable. The light that now touched their skin was not just the sun's glow, but a reflection of the strength they had drawn from each other. Together, they had broken the curse and restored the ancient power of the reef, a feat that would ripple out into the world for generations to come. They stood in quiet awe of the transformation around them, their hearts beating in unison, grounded in the truth of their shared victory. The world, so often fraught with uncertainty and danger, felt different now, brighter somehow, as though the darkness had been fully banished and only light remained in its wake. Serena felt a deep sense of peace, the weight of the past months of struggle and fear lifting from her shoulders. Adrian, too, felt the shift within him, the exhaustion fading as the immense weight of their victory settled into his bones. They had not only saved the reef, but they had also discovered a bond deeper than either of them had imagined. And as they stood together, side by side, their hearts lightened by the knowledge that they had emerged victorious, they knew that the future, though uncertain, would hold no more darkness that they could not face together. But as the last of the darkness receded into the depths of the ocean, Adrian and Serena both understood the truth of their victory. It was not the end, but merely the beginning of a new chapter. The ocean, vast and endless, still whispered its secrets beneath the surface, holding mysteries and challenges yet to be uncovered. While the reef was safe, its ancient magic restored, they knew that there was still much to explore, much to protect. The forces of darkness they had defeated were just one shadow in the grand expanse of the world, and they had only scratched the surface of the ocean's deeper, more profound mysteries. Serena could feel it in her bones, the pull of the sea's untold stories, the beckoning call of the unknown that still waited for them in the distant waters. There would be more battles, more tests of strength and will, but this time, they would not face them as strangers to each other. They had learned what it meant to fight side by side, to stand united in the face of overwhelming odds. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden light across the sparkling ocean, Serena felt a sense of quiet determination settle over her. She turned to Adrian, her eyes meeting his with a promise that was both unspoken and unbreakable. The bond they had forged in the fire of battle had grown into something stronger than either of them could have anticipated. It was not just a partnership of magic and strength, but a connection of hearts, one that had been tested and solidified through every trial they had faced. No longer were they simply allies, but something more, a union that defied the darkness they had conquered. They had proven, in the most challenging of circumstances, that together they were unstoppable. The future, though unknown, no longer seemed daunting. For whatever lay ahead, they knew they would face it with unwavering resolve, bolstered by the strength of their shared bond. The world stretched out before them, wide and full of possibility, but they stood on the threshold of that new beginning with the certainty that nothing could tear them apart. The ocean might still hold dangers, hidden threats that lurked in its unfathomable depths, but Adrian and Serena were ready to meet them. They had each other, and that was more than enough. The struggles they had endured had proven that no curse, no shadow, could ever break the strength they had found in one another. It was not just their magic that made them strong, but the unwavering trust, the shared history, and the unspoken understanding between them. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them as they always had, together, united by a bond that was stronger than any force of darkness the world could throw at them. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but as they looked out over the horizon, they knew they were ready for whatever came next.